337, chapters 9 and 10. Book talk begins at... Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from the shores of the Potomac in Virginia, the Old Dominion. Episode 337, You're Feeling Very Sleepy. Well, hello. Taxes are done. I'm feeling ever so much better about life, knowing that they're done. And I'm feeling very sleepy. And this is not because I'm being hypnotized or anything like that, but because I got the preliminary results from the sleep study. Now, hold on to your hats, especially those of you who have followed this podcast for a while. You know how much I seem to be able to get done in a day, right? Or a week, or a month, or a year. And it seems like a lot, and yet I'm always tired, which I thought was just because I'm doing a lot. It turns out after this sleep study, it's not so much that. It's that I'm not actually getting any much restful sleep. I'm going straight from wide awake to the most active mental stage of sleep, which is your dream state. So I haven't gotten a good night's sleep in a really long time, which is why I can get 8 or 9 hours of sleep, wake up, and be ready to go right back to bed. And I could fall asleep. It's called narcolepsy. And yes, you may have noticed I have not fallen asleep on the microphone. I have not fallen asleep with my face in the mashed potatoes. I have not had problems driving. I am able to stay awake. The difference is, if you gave me a 2-minute break and I put my head down, I'd be out like a light. It's not just because I'm doing too much. It's because I'm really not sleeping the way normal muggles are supposed to sleep. So I find out more about this tomorrow, and I'm fascinated. I don't really know what's causing it. I don't know what can be done for it. But I hope there's something, because I'm really tired all the time. And I'm not anemic, and it's not my thyroid and all this stuff. So my husband and I are both very curious to see what this turns out to be. But I thought I'd give you the preliminary results, just in case you wondered. All right, but enough about that now. On to North and South. And all of a sudden I remember when I did that during Dracula, I had the wolf howl. I don't have anything like that for North and South. Maybe I could get the sound of teacups clinking or a factory whistle blowing. We'll see what I can come up with. But North and South this week, I have 2 chapters. The reason is just that the first chapter is very, very brief. And the second chapter is very, very good. So that's why you're getting 2 today. And there are a few things in this chapter that kind of went right over my head the first few times I read it. And then when I started doing research and found notes, they're kind of interesting little tidbits. Gaskell was throwing in some Easter eggs, like they used to do on Lost, those things called Easter eggs, where people who are watching back, watching the recorded version, if they slow it down, you can see something, or if you watch it over and over again, something will become clear. It's that kind of thing. Well, Gaskell was doing this, but she was doing it for Unitarians. So there are little throwaways that people who were Unitarians would catch on to, or dissenters, they would catch on to, and everybody else would kind of glaze over it. Yeah, whatever. She also threw in quite a bit of Latin every once in a while in these 2 chapters. Ad libitum is indiscriminately just kind of tossing it around. And it's used kind of humorously at the beginning of chapter 9. Pythias and Damon, 2 mythology BFFs, two guys who were just best friends forever, all the way until they died. That's one. When you hear her talk about Matthew Henry's Bible commentaries, he was a dissenter. And that's one of the ones I was talking about. He lived from 1662 to 1714, so this was quite early. And he actually died before he finished all of his commentaries. But if you had all 6 volumes of his stuff, it would indicate that you were at least interested in what was being said in the dissenting world. There is a French term, which I am sure I will butcher, a morceau de salon, which was kind of a piano piece that would have been, it would be the kind of piano piece that ladies would play in the parlor to entertain their guests. Light, not too challenging. It's not Chopin, is what we're going for here. So that's what that is. And then to me, there is a curiosity here because there's a reference to a Davenport. And the note that I've got says that this is a writing table that has lots of drawers in it. And this is very odd because I distinctly remember my great-grandparents talking about a Davenport, and I could swear that they were talking about a couch or a sofa. I don't know how these things got transposed, or if it was merely my somewhere between birth and 7-year-old mind not understanding what they were talking about. But I've always liked the word Davenport, I guess because it reminds me of my great-grandparents. But I don't know. Do you know what this is? I'm very curious now. And there will be a reference to American apples. This is actually a thing. Elizabeth Gaskell was sent a basket of imported American apples, which she said were quite delicious. And so, write what you know. So here's one of those moments where something that happened in the author's life shows up in her book. And tasty, too. There is a ballad from Northern England, a ballad called The Ballad of Chevy Chase. This is spelled Chevy, Chevy, and then Chase is spelled Chace. This is not Chevy Chase, who was on Community or was on Saturday Night Live or was Fletch. But it was one of those things that when I came across it, my reaction was, what? And now you won't be surprised. That's what that is. And that pretty well takes care of any weirdness that you would have with these chapters. There's actually a lot more kind of colloquial and localized information in these 2 chapters, but you'll see why that happens as soon as we get into chapter 10. So I'm not going to hold you back any longer. Here we go with chapter 9, first, of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell.
Chapter 9. Dressing for Tea. Let China's earth, enriched with colored stains, penciled with gold and streaked with azure veins, the grateful flavor of the Indian leaf or mocha's sunburnt berry, glad receive. Mrs. Barbauld. The day after this meeting with Higgins and his daughter, Mr. Hale came upstairs into the little drawing-room at an unusual hour. He went up to different objects in the room, as if to examine them, but Margaret saw that it was merely a nervous trick, a way of putting off something he wished, yet feared, to say. Out it came at last. "My dear, I've asked Mr. Thornton to come to tea, tonight." Mrs. Hale was leaning back in her easy-chair with her eyes shut and an expression of pain on her face which had become habitual to her of late. But she roused up into querulousness at this speech of her husband's. "Mr. Thornton? And tonight? What in the world does the man want to come here for? And Dixon is washing my muslins and laces, and there is no soft water with these horrid east winds, which I suppose we shall have all the year round in Milton." "The wind is veering round, my dear," said Mr. Hale, looking out at the smoke, which drifted right from the east, only he did not yet understand the points of the compass, and rather arranged them ad libitum, according to circumstances. "Don't tell me," said Mrs. Hale, shuddering up, and wrapping her shawl about her still more closely. "But east or west wind, I suppose this man comes." "Oh, Mamma, that shows you never saw Mr. Thornton. He looks like a person who would enjoy battling with every adverse thing he could meet with, enemies, winds, or circumstances. The more it rains and blows, the more certain we are to have him. But I'll go and help Dixon. I'm getting to be a famous clear-starcher, and he won't want any amusement beyond talking to Papa. Papa, I am really longing to see the Pythias to your Damon. You know, I never saw him but once, and then we were so puzzled to know what to say to each other that we did not get on particularly well." "I don't know that you would ever like him or think him agreeable, Margaret. He is not a ladies' man." Margaret wreathed her throat in a scornful curve. "I don't particularly admire ladies' men, Papa. But Mr. Thornton comes here as your friend, as one who has appreciated you." "The only person in Milton," said Mrs. Hale. "So we will give him a welcome and some cocoa-nut cakes. Dixon will be flattered if we ask her to make some, and I will undertake to iron your caps, Mamma." Many a time that morning did Margaret wish Mr. Thornton far enough away. She had planned other employments for herself, a letter to Edith, a good piece of Dante, a visit to the Higginses, but instead she ironed away, listening to Dixon's complaints and only hoping that by an excess of sympathy she might prevent her from carrying the recital of her sorrows to Mrs. Hale. Every now and then Margaret had to remind herself of her father's regard for Mr. Thornton to subdue the irritation of weariness that was stealing over her and bringing on one of the bad headaches to which she had lately become liable. She could hardly speak when she sat down at last and told her mother that she was no longer Peggy the laundry maid, but Margaret Hale the lady. She meant this speech for a little joke, and was vexed enough with her busy tongue when she found her mother taking it seriously. "Yes, if any one had told me when I was Miss Beresford and one of the belles of the county that a child of mine would have to stand half a day in a little poky kitchen, working away like a servant, that we might prepare properly for the reception of a tradesman, and that this tradesman should be the only—" "Oh, Mamma," said Margaret, lifting herself up, "don't punish me so for a careless speech. I don't mind ironing or any kind of work for you and Papa. I am myself a born and bred lady through it all, even though it comes to scouring a floor or washing dishes. I am tired now just for a little while, but in half an hour I shall be ready to do the same over again. And as to Mr. Thornton's being in trade, why, he can't help that now, poor fellow. I don't suppose his education would fit him for much else." Margaret lifted herself slowly up and went to her own room, for just now she could not bear much more. In Mr. Thornton's house at this very same time, a similar yet different scene was going on. A large-boned lady, long past middle age, sat at work in a grim, handsomely furnished dining room. Her features, like her frame, were strong and massive rather than heavy. Her face moved slowly from one decided expression to another equally decided. There was no great variety in her countenance, but those who looked at it once generally looked at it again. Even the passers-by in the street half turned their heads to gaze an instant longer at the firm, severe, dignified woman who never gave way in street courtesy or paused in her straight onward course to the clearly defined end which she proposed to herself. She was handsomely dressed in stout black silk, of which not a thread was worn or discolored. She was mending a large long tablecloth of the finest texture, holding it up against the light occasionally to discover thin places which required her delicate care. There was not a book about in the room, with the exception of Matthew Henry's Bible commentaries, 6 volumes of which lay in the center of the massive sideboard, flanked by a tea-urn on one side and a lamp on the other. In some remote apartment there was exercise upon the piano going on. Someone was practicing up a morceau du salon, playing it very rapidly, every third note, on an average, being either indistinct or wholly missed out, and the loud chords at the end being half of them false, but not the less satisfactory to the performer. Mrs. Thornton heard a step, like her own in its decisive character, pass the dining-room door. "John, is that you?" Her son opened the door and showed himself. "What has brought you home so early? I thought you were going to tea with that friend of Mr. Bell's, that Mr. Hale." "So I am, Mother. I'm come home to dress." "Dress? When I was a girl, young men were satisfied with dressing once in a day. Why should you dress to go and take a cup of tea with an old parson?" "Mr. Hale is a gentleman, and his wife and daughter are ladies." "Wife and daughter? Do they teach too? What do they do? You've never mentioned them." "No, Mother, because I have never seen Mrs. Hale. I've only seen Miss Hale for half an hour." "Take care you don't get caught by a penniless girl, John." "I am not easily caught, Mother, as I think you know. But I must not have Miss Hale spoken of in that way, which you know is offensive to me. I was never aware of any young lady trying to catch me yet, nor do I believe that any one has ever given themselves that useless trouble." Mrs. Thornton did not choose to yield the point to her son, or else she had, in general, pride enough for her sex. "Well, I only say take care. Perhaps our Milton girls have too much spirit and good feeling to go angling after husbands. But this Miss Hale comes out of the aristocratic counties where, if all tales be true, husbands are reckoned prizes." Mr. Thornton's brow contracted, and he came a step forward into the room. "Mother," with a short, scornful laugh, "you will make me confess. The only time I saw Miss Hale, she treated me with a haughty civility which had a strong flavour of contempt in it. She held herself aloof from me as if she'd been a queen and I her humble, unwashed vassal. Be easy, Mother." "No, I'm not easy nor content either. What business had she, a renegade clergyman's daughter, to turn up her nose at you? I would dress for none of them, a saucy set, if I were you." As he was leaving the room, he said, "Mr. Hale is good and gentle and learned. He is not saucy. As for Mrs. Hale, I will tell you what she is like tonight, if you care to hear." He shut the door and was gone. "Despise my son, treat him as her vassal, indeed. I should like to know where she could find such another. Boy and man, he's the noblest, stoutest heart I ever knew. I don't care if I am his mother. I can see what's what and not be blind. I know what Fanny is, and I know what John is. Despise him. I hate her."
End of Chapter 9.
Chapter 10. Wrought Iron and Gold. "We are the trees whom shaking fastens more." George Herbert. Mr. Thornton left the house without coming into the dining room again. He was rather late, and walked rapidly out to Crampton. He was anxious not to slight his new friend by any disrespectful unpunctuality. The church clock struck 7:30 as he stood at the door awaiting Dixon's slow movements, always doubly tardy when she had to degrade herself by answering the doorbell. He was ushered into the little drawing-room and kindly greeted by Mr. Hale, who led him up to his wife, whose pale face and shawl-draped figure made a silent excuse for the cold languor of her greeting. Margaret was lighting the lamp when he entered, for the darkness was coming on. The lamp threw a pretty light into the center of the dusky room, from which, with country habits, they did not exclude the night skies and the outer darkness of air. Somehow, that room contrasted itself with the one he had lately left, handsome, ponderous, with no sign of feminine habitation except in the one spot where his mother sat, and no convenience for any other employment than eating and drinking. To be sure, it was a dining room. His mother preferred to sit in it, and her will was a household law. But the drawing room was not like this. It was 20 times as fine, not 1/4 as comfortable. Here were no mirrors, not even a scrap of glass to reflect the light and answer the same purpose as water in a landscape. No gilding, a warm, sober breadth of colouring, well relieved by the dear old Helston chintz curtains and chair covers. An open davenport stood in the window opposite the door. In the other there was a stand with a tall white china vase from which drooped wreaths of English ivy, pale green birch, and copper-coloured beech leaves. Pretty baskets of work stood about in different places, and books, not cared for on account of their binding solely, lay on one table as if recently put down. Behind the door was another table decked out for tea, with a white tablecloth on which flourished the cocoa-nut cakes, and a basket piled with oranges and ruddy American apples heaped on leaves. It appeared to Mr. Thornton that all these graceful cares were habitual to the family, and especially of a piece with Margaret. She stood by the tea-table in a light-coloured muslin gown which had a good deal of pink about it. She looked as if she was not attending to the conversation, but solely busy with the teacups, among which her round ivory hands moved with pretty, noiseless daintiness. She had a bracelet on one taper arm, which would fall down over her round wrist. Mr. Thornton watched the replacing of this troublesome ornament with far more attention than he listened to her father. It seemed as if it fascinated him to see her push it up impatiently until it tightened her soft flesh, and then to mark the loosening, the fall. He could almost have exclaimed, "There it goes again." There was so little left to be done after he arrived at the preparation for tea that he was almost sorry the obligation of eating and drinking came so soon to prevent his watching Margaret. She handed him his cup of tea with the proud air of an unwilling slave, but her eye caught the moment when he was ready for another cup, and he almost longed to ask her to do for him what he saw her compelled to do for her father, who took her little finger and thumb in his masculine hand and made them serve as sugar tongs. Mr. Thornton saw her beautiful eyes lifted to her father, full of light, half laughter and half love, as this bit of pantomime went on between the two, unobserved, as they fancied, by any. Margaret's head still ached, as the paleness of her complexion and her silence might have testified, but she was resolved to throw herself into the breach if there was any long, untoward pause, rather than that her father's friend, pupil, and guest should have cause to think himself in any way neglected. But the conversation went on, and Margaret drew into a corner near her mother with her work after the tea things were taken away, and felt that she might let her thoughts roam without fear of being suddenly wanted to fill up a gap. Mr. Thornton and Mr. Hale were both absorbed in a continuation of some subject which had been started at their last meeting. Margaret was recalled to a sense of the present by some trivial, low-spoken remark of her mother's, and on suddenly looking up from her work, her eye was caught by the difference of outward appearance between her father and Mr. Thornton, as betokening such distinctly opposite natures. Her father was of slight figure, which made him appear taller than he really was, when not contrasted, as at this time, with the tall, massive frame of another. The lines in her father's face were soft and waving, with a frequent undulating kind of trembling movement passing over them, showing every fluctuating emotion. The eyelids were large and arched, giving to the eyes a peculiar languid beauty which was almost feminine. The brows were finely arched, but were, by the very size of the dreamy lids, raised to a considerable distance from the eyes. Now in Mr. Thornton's face the straight brows fell low over the clear, deep-set, earnest eyes which, without being unpleasantly sharp, seemed intent enough to penetrate into the very heart and core of what he was looking at. The lines in the face were few but firm, as if they were carved in marble, and lay principally about the lips, which were slightly compressed over a set of teeth so faultless and beautiful as to give the effect of sudden sunlight when the rare bright smile, coming in an instant and shining out of the eyes, changed the whole look from the severe and resolved expression of a man ready to do and dare everything, to the keen, honest enjoyment of the moment, which is seldom shown so fearlessly and instantaneously, except by children. Margaret liked this smile. It was the first thing she had admired in this new friend of her father's, and the opposition of character shown in all these details of appearance she had just been noticing seemed to explain the attraction they evidently felt towards each other. She rearranged her mother's worsted work and fell back into her own thoughts, as completely forgotten by Mr. Thornton as if she had not been in the room, so thoroughly was he occupied in explaining to Mr. Hale the magnificent power, yet delicate adjustment of the might of the steam hammer, which was recalling to Mr. Hale some of the wonderful stories of subservient genii in the Arabian Nights, one moment stretching from earth to sky and filling all the width of the horizon, at the next obediently compressed into a vase small enough to be borne in the hand of a child. And this imagination of power, this practical realization of a gigantic thought, came out of one man's brain in our good town. That very man has it within him to mount step by step on each wonder he achieves to higher marvel still. And I'll be bound to say we have many among us who, if he were gone, could spring into the breach and carry on the war which compels, and shall compel, all material power to yield to science. Your boast reminds me of the old lines, "I've 100 captains in England," he said, "as good as ever was he." At her father's quotation, Margaret looked suddenly up with inquiring wonder in her eyes. How in the world had they got from cogwheels to Chevy Chase? "It is no boast of mine," replied Mr. Thornton. "It is plain matter of fact. I won't deny that I am proud of belonging to a town, or perhaps I should rather say a district, the necessities of which give birth to such grandeur of conception. I would rather be a man toiling, suffering, nay, failing and successless here, than lead a dull, prosperous life in the old worn grooves of what you call more aristocratic society down in the south, with their slow days of careless ease. One may be clogged with honey and unable to rise and fly." "You are mistaken," said Margaret, roused by the aspersion on her beloved South to a fond vehemence of defence that brought the colour into her cheeks and the angry tears into her eyes. "You do not know anything about the South. If there is less adventure or less progress, I suppose I must not say less excitement, from the gambling spirit of trade which seems requisite to force out these wonderful inventions, there is less suffering also. I see men here going about in the streets who look ground down by some pinching sorrow or care, who are not only sufferers but haters. Now in the South we have our poor, but there is not that terrible expression in their countenances of a sullen sense of injustice which I see here. You do not know the South, Mr. Thornton," she concluded, collapsing into a determined silence, and angry with herself for having said so much. "And may I say you do not know the North?" asked he, with an inexpressible gentleness in his tone, as he saw that he had really hurt her. She continued resolutely silent, yearning after the lovely haunts she had left far away in Hampshire, with a passionate longing that made her feel her voice would be unsteady and trembling if she spoke. "At any rate, Mr. Thornton," said Mrs. Hale, "you will allow that Milton is a much more smoky, dirty town than you will ever meet with in the South." "I'm afraid I must give up its cleanliness," said Mr. Thornton, with a quick, gleaming smile. "But we are bidden by Parliament to burn our own smoke, so I suppose, like good little children, we shall do as we are bid, sometime." But I think you told me you had altered your chimneys so as to consume the smoke, did you not? Asked Mr. Hale. Mine were altered by my own will before Parliament meddled with the affair. It was an immediate outlay, but it repays me in the saving of coal. I'm not sure whether I should have done it if I had waited until the Act was passed. At any rate, I should have waited to be informed against and fined, and given all the trouble and yielding that I legally could. But all laws which depend for their enforcement upon informers and fines become inert from the odiousness of the machinery. I doubt if there has been a chimney in Milton informed against for 5 years past, although some are constantly sending out 1/3 of their coal in what is called here unparliamentary smoke. I only know it is impossible to keep the muslin blinds clean here above a week together, and at Helston we have had them up for a month or more, and they have not looked dirty at the end of that time. And as for hands, Margaret, how many times did you say you had washed your hands this morning before 12 o'clock? 3 times, was it not?
Yes, Mamma.
You seem to have a strong objection to Acts of Parliament and all legislation affecting your mode of management down here at Milton, said Mr. Hale. Yes, I have, and many others have as well, and with justice, I think. The whole machinery, I don't mean the wood and iron machinery now, of the cotton trade is so new that it is no wonder if it does not work well in every part all at once. 70 years ago, what was it? And now, what is it not? Raw, crude materials came together. Men at the same level as regarded education and station took suddenly the different positions of masters and men owing to the mother wit as regarded opportunities and probabilities, which distinguished some and made them far-seeing as to what great future lay concealed in that rude model of Sir Richard Arkwright's. The rapid development of what might be called a new trade gave those early masters enormous power of wealth and command. I don't mean merely over the workmen. I mean over purchasers, over the whole world's market. Why, I may give you as an instance an advertisement inserted not 50 years ago in a Milton paper that so-and-so, one of the half-dozen calico printers of the time, would close his warehouse at noon each day, therefore that all purchasers must come before that hour. Fancy a man dictating in this manner the time when he would sell and when he would not sell. Now, I believe if a good customer chose to come at midnight, I should get up and stand hat in hand to receive his orders.
Margaret's lip curled, but somehow she was compelled to listen. She could no longer abstract herself in her own thoughts.
I only name such things to show what almost unlimited power the manufacturers had about the beginning of this century. The men were rendered dizzy by it. Because a man was successful in his ventures, there was no reason that in all other things his mind should be well balanced. On the contrary, his sense of justice and his simplicity were often utterly smothered under the glut of wealth that came down upon him, and they tell strange tales of the wild extravagance of living indulged in on gala days by those early cotton lords. There can be no doubt, too, of the tyranny they exercised over their work-people. You know the proverb, Mr. Hale, set a beggar on horseback and he'll ride to the devil. Well, some of those early manufacturers did ride to the devil in a magnificent style, crushing human bone and flesh under their horses' hooves without remorse. But by and by came a reaction. There were more factories, more masters, more men were wanted. The power of masters and men became more evenly balanced, and now the battle is pretty fairly waged between us. We will hardly submit to the decision of an umpire, much less to the interference of a meddler with only a smattering of the knowledge of the real facts of the case, even though that meddler be called the High Court of Parliament.
Is there necessity for calling it a battle between the two classes? Asked Mr. Hale. I know from your using the term it is one which gives a true idea of the real state of things to your mind.
It is true, and
I believe it to be as much a necessity as that prudent wisdom and good conduct are always opposed to and doing battle with ignorance and improvidence. It is one of the great beauties of our system that a working man may raise himself into the power and position of a master by his own exertions and behaviour, that, in fact, every one who rules himself to decency and sobriety of conduct and attention to his duties comes over to our ranks. It may not be always as a master, but as an overlooker, a cashier, a bookkeeper, a clerk, one on the side of authority and order. You consider all who are unsuccessful in raising themselves in the world, from whatever cause, as your enemies, then, if I understand you rightly, said Margaret in a clear, cold voice. As their own enemies, certainly, said he quickly, not a little piqued by the haughty disapproval her form of expression and tone of speaking implied. But, in a moment, his straightforward honesty made him feel that his words were but a poor and quibbling answer to what she had said, and, be she as scornful as she liked, it was a duty he owed to himself to explain, as truly as he could, what he did mean. Yet it was very difficult to separate her interpretation and keep it distinct from his meaning. He could best have illustrated what he wanted to say by telling them something of his own life, but was it not too personal a subject to speak about to strangers? Still, it was the simple, straightforward way of explaining his meaning, so, putting aside the touch of shyness that brought a momentary flush of colour into his dark cheek, he said, "I'm not speaking without book. 16 years ago my father died under very miserable circumstances. I was taken from school and had to become a man, as well as I could, in a few days. I had such a mother as few are blessed with, a woman of strong power and firm resolve. We went into a small country town where living was cheaper than in Milton, and where I got employment in a draper's shop. A capital place, by the way, for obtaining a knowledge of goods. Week by week our income came to 15 shillings, out of which 3 people had to be kept. My mother managed so that I put by 3 out of these 15 shillings regularly. This made the beginning. This taught me self-denial. Now that I am able to afford my mother such comforts as her age, rather than her own wish requires, I thank her silently on each occasion for the early training she gave me. Now when I feel that in my own case it is no good luck, nor merit, nor talent, but simply the habits of life which taught me to despise indulgences not thoroughly earned, indeed, never to think twice about them, I believe that this suffering which Miss Hale says is impressed on the countenances of the people of Milton is but the natural punishment of dishonestly enjoyed pleasure at some former period of their lives. I do not look on self-indulgent sensual people as worthy of my hatred. I simply look upon them with contempt for their poorness of character."
"But you have had the rudiments of a good education," remarked Mr. Hale. "The quick zest with which you are now reading Homer shows me that you do not come to it as an unknown book. You have read it before and are only recalling your old knowledge."
"That is true. I had blundered along it at school. I dare say I was even considered a pretty fair classic in those days, though my Latin and Greek have slipped away from me since. But I ask you, what preparations they were for such a life as I had to lead? None at all, utterly none at all. On the point of education, any man who can read and write starts fair with me in the amount of really useful knowledge that I had at that time."
"Well, I don't agree with you, but there I am perhaps somewhat of a pedant. Did not the recollection of the heroic simplicity of the Homeric life nerve you up?"
"Not one bit," exclaimed Mr. Thornton, laughing. "I was too busy to think about any dead people with the living pressing alongside of me neck to neck in the struggle for bread. Now that I have my mother safe in the quiet peace that becomes her age and duly rewards her former exertions, I can turn to all that old narration and thoroughly enjoy it. I dare say my remark came from the professional feeling of there being nothing like leather, replied Mr. Hale. When Mr. Thornton rose up to go away, after shaking hands with Mr. and Mrs. Hale, he made an advance to Margaret to wish her goodbye in a similar manner. It was the frank, familiar custom of the place, but Margaret was not prepared for it. She simply bowed her farewell, although the instant she saw the hand, half put out, quickly drawn back, she was sorry she had not been aware of the intention. Mr. Thornton, however, knew nothing of her sorrow, and drawing himself up to his full height, walked off, muttering as he left the house, "A more proud, disagreeable girl I never saw. Even her great beauty is blotted out of one's memory by her scornful ways."
Right. We got them in the same room at the same time and almost talking, but the sparks are flying already. Proud. This would have been called Pride and Prejudice if that title hadn't already been taken, right? We can see it now. They both are proud. They both are prejudiced in their own ways against each other's homeland, really. And yet, the sparks. Now, I'm sure some people have had reactions to Mr. Thornton's mother over time that, depending on whether you're a Freudian or not, would veer into the Oedipal complex or whatever. And I really hope that Chapter 10 kind of puts that all to rest, that this is a close family, the Thorntons, a tight-knit family, very much like the Hales are, a small family, but also one where the pride that Mrs. Thornton feels for herself and for her son comes from hard-won success. These people have not had easy lives. They have worked for everything they got. They are very proud of that fact. And I think for Americans, it probably doesn't seem like all that big a deal. It's like, oh, well, this is one of those self-made men. This is Carnegie. This is, somebody who started off with nothing and made their way in the world. And over here, it's the American dream. You pull yourself up by your own bootstraps and all that. And isn't it great? Rah, rah, rah. And I don't think prior to the Industrial Revolution, there was a whole lot of opportunity for upward mobility in a classed society. And so Mrs. Thornton, I think any mother would be really displeased to see her son hanging out with someone who didn't value the same things in him that she did, the things that saved their family, which is why it was so important for Gaskell to put that story out of Thornton's mouth, not told third person, but Thornton tells it to Margaret and Margaret's father and mother, that it's so important for us to get that story now rather than later. Now, if she'd saved it for later, then it would have been one of those kind of cheeseball moments, oh, why didn't you tell me so long ago? Oh, because I needed to have the plot last long enough for there to be some kind of conflict. And if I had dropped it all so early, you would have run off with me back then, and then there would have been no movie and the end. And happily, it is at this point in our narrative where I can finally share some of my conversations with Larry Uffelman with you. Up until now, our entire conversation that I recorded has been loaded with spoilers, and I'm going to be, piecemealing as we go so that I don't spoil anything else. But I thought you'd like to hear a little bit of a conversation between me and someone who has spent his life studying Elizabeth Gaskell and also this book.
It's clear from the very beginning of the novel that Thornton and she are attracted to each other, and that ultimately this is going to work out.
Yep.
On page 60 in the edition I read, for instance, we discover that Mr. Thornton has replaced the offensive wallpaper.
Yes.
Well, that's a sign he's not as awful a person as Margaret has supposed. So that inevitably the two are going to work this out. But it's not going to be easy, and Margaret is going to assert herself.
Yeah.
As she must.
Right.
Margaret's father doesn't create any progress.
Right.
He has retreated.
Yeah.
And he's very sad and he's sorry and he has the right sort of emotions, but he doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
Whereas Margaret, in her own way, forces the issue.
Yeah. And all the way along, too, when she goes up and she's looking at the property.
Oh, yeah.
And just taking the bull by the horns over and over again.
Well, you can note, I think, that she has an almost masculine role.
Yes.
Masculine role in Victorian terms, not masculine role in terms of truth.
Right.
But she does all of the work in that family.
Yes, she does.
She organizes the move.
Yep.
She finds the place to live. She gets the wallpaper changed. She asserts herself over and over again in places where some kind of leadership is necessary. So she has an almost unconventional role from the very beginning of the novel.
Yeah. I was surprised at how very, very modern she felt as a character in some ways. And then there are moments like the wallpaper. The first time I read it, I thought, oh, really? Seriously? That is the only thing you're going to... And then I thought, no. If you're a woman, you are going to be spending at least 80% of your days in that room with that wallpaper. And if it's a Charlotte Perkins Gilman yellow wallpaper situation,
then you really need to make a change.
You need to change the wallpaper. It's not a small thing if that's the only room you get to live your life in for the most part, except for, visiting.
Yeah.
And there was no one to visit there, so.
Yeah, and it's also clear early in the novel that Margaret likes Mr. Thornton's rendition of his early life. She admires his plain-spokenness. Mm-hmm. What's needed is something between the two to overcome the prejudice and the misunderstanding between them.
Yeah.
They fundamentally are attracted to each other, and then, as in any relationship, the rest of it has to be worked out.
That's so true. It's like the easy part's done. Now we got to get the hard part.
Yeah, you changed the wallpaper. Now get on with it.
If only life were that simple all
the time. Yes, indeed.
So yes, I have an awful lot of fun talking to Larry, and I will have more audio of our conversation as we go through the book and past the point of the spoilers. But, here we are. It's this fabulous point in the book. We finally get Margaret and Thornton together in the same room in a situation where he's just revealed a very personal story about himself, and Margaret's intrigued. And then there's this gaffe with the handshake thing. And of course, Margaret's got to be frustrated because she learned her manners in London, which means that's the way you should be doing things. And he doesn't get it, and she doesn't get it, and it's just a big mess. And that's, I think, one of the things that makes this book so awesome is that it isn't either one's fault that they can't speak the same language, that they're talking at cross purposes so often. It's just, well, yeah. I mean, it would take a real effort on both of their parts to sit down and say, okay, explain to me how you people do all of these things, because I don't get it, and none of y'all are making any sense to me. Yeah, but that takes a certain amount of courage. It also takes someone who gives you the opportunity to do that, and they don't seem to be giving each other a whole lot of opportunities. I mean, I would actually say at this point, Thornton has tried. Maybe some. And Margaret's tried in her own way. Some. And Margaret will continue to be an interesting and strong presence throughout this novel. And with that, I think I'm going to let you go. You have a great week. Don't forget to drop by Facebook and say hi, or Ravelry and say hi. You can leave reviews for the show and the app at Amazon, at iTunes, and wherever else you can find. And that would be fabulous. You take care. Have a great week. I will talk to you soon. And by then I'll know why I am so sleepy. Have a great one. Bye. 338, chapters 11 and 12 of North and South. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from the shores of the Potomac in Virginia, the Old Dominion. Episode 338, Survey Says... Well, hello. It is I, Heather, who's moving to New Hope, Pennsylvania. Yes, Lyme disease. I know that wasn't what you were expecting me to say. Lyme disease. I heard on the radio, there was a chat show, and they were all discussing Lyme disease and how bloody awful it is, not just to get it, but to get it diagnosed. Because like the gluten thing, like the narcolepsy thing, it can masquerade as so many other things that if you, for example, are in an area where you might get bit by a deer tick, but you live somewhere else that doesn't have a whole lot of Lyme disease, your doctors are going to just completely miss it. It's not their fault. It's not something that they see. So if you have weird symptoms, but you visited someplace where there might be deer ticks, even a year or two ago, and weird symptoms like it seems like you have fibromyalgia or rheumatoid arthritis, but you don't actually have those things. Or if you're sleepy all the time, or you have ungodly headaches that won't stop, but nothing's wrong with your brain. It could be Lyme disease. And so in listening to this, I was thinking, oh dear, we're moving to a house with a big yard that ends in a creek, and there's lots of stuff to run around in, and boy stuff, and get muddy and roll around in things, and deer ticks. So I put out a little tweet on Twitter the other day because it was bugging me. All of a sudden I woke up one morning and said, flea and tick collars, which is not the kind of thing I usually wake up and say out loud in front of everyone. But I was thinking, oh wow, flea and tick collars, just put that around the kids' ankles, over their socks, because I'm sure you're not supposed to put it on your skin. Put a couple of tick collars on their ankles and let them run and have fun, and that should be fine, right? So then I thought, well, wait a minute, that seems like a no-brainer. Why aren't people doing that? And I didn't get any responses saying, oh no, you can't do that. That would be very bad. But I did get a tweet back about a spray that you don't use on skin. You put it on clothing that really works. For those of you who aren't in the United States, there's been this deer tick problem. It's been going on for quite some time, but they hadn't really identified it as the source of the problem until it had been a problem for quite a while. And Lyme disease, once it gets in you, there's nothing they can really do. So the only thing you can do is if you catch it within the first couple of weeks, then they can pound you with antibiotics and probably, which is scary because it's no guarantee, but probably the antibiotics will take care of the problem and you'll never think about it again. Yay for spray that can be put onto clothes. I get very yeesh about the stuff that you put on your skin, like DEET and things like that. It makes me very uncomfortable, as do mosquito bites, as you know, but so yay for alternative. The other thing that was really, really very useful information is that well more than half, not quite 60% of you, are either already signed up for the CraftLit newsletter, or you ran off and signed up as soon as you finished taking the survey. It has become clear because of this survey that that is going to be the most effective way for me to get information to you that is time sensitive or travel related or anything like that. You requested that the emails be brief, informative, and yeah, I let you know that stuff. A couple of people said that they really did not like getting the couple of times that I've put out little audio, like mini podcasts going, wow, something has gone horribly, horribly wrong, and I'll get a podcast out as soon as I can. Like, that doesn't work as well as getting a little newsletter in your email inbox. So if you haven't signed up for the CraftLit newsletter, there will be a very easy to follow link in the show notes. I highly recommend, now that I have this data, that you go ahead and sign up. The kinds of things you might expect to get: if iTunes goes down, if something horrible happened with an episode, which we had happen, when was it? Was it back in Little Women, where I skipped a chapter? Accidentally skipped a chapter and had to let everybody know, oh my gosh, go back and pick up, that version A instead of just that version, because you've lost this piece of important information. So stuff like that, as well as if I'm traveling, if I'm speaking, if I'm teaching, if there's a new raffle. So thank you. The other thing that was so obvious was not only are CraftLit people just better, but they're also really better writers. You guys are so funny. And you have opinions. You have opinions about books, and you have opinions about what you like. And it just makes me love you so much more. So thank you. Listener Christina sent me a couple of links last week, and she mentioned you didn't really seem like you were on your game last week, which is so true. Figuring out what's really going on has been an interesting journey. And I was very tired last week. And yeah, trying to figure out what the medicine is supposed to be and the dosage I'm supposed to be on and how much sleep is the right amount of sleep and all of this, it did take me out of the loop a little bit. But Christina stepped in and put links to a Davenport desk and to the Chevy Chase ballad. She sent those to me, and then I put them at the bottom of last week's show notes. The other thing, I followed links off of the Davenport desk site, is the reason why my grandparents called their sofa a Davenport is because the Davenport company in the northeastern United States was famous for making a very boxy kind of sofa. It was a sleeper sofa and had very distinctive upholstery. And so on Twitter, we were having this whole conversation about Davenport sofas and remembering our grandparents and nostalgia. So that information is now available to you. Now, there is one other thing that I came across on the web this week, and it's been a tricky subject. And I've been going back and forth going, I don't know if I should bring this. I probably should bring this. I don't know if I should bring this up. I'm bringing it up because you're smart, good, and wonderful people. One of my former students, who's actually a listener and who I was lucky enough to get to see when I was up in New York the other weekend, she has 3 small children. She's an amazing mom. She's an amazing reader. She was an amazing student. She's just an amazing person. And she posted something that at first glance, she had been kind of distressed by, and I knew I was going to be distressed by because, coming from an educational background, you wind up educating all kinds of kids and all kinds of adults when you teach university. I always felt that part of my job in the classroom was kind of the Atticus Finch ideal of you can't really know somebody until you walk a mile in their shoes. And that goes for characters too. So if you encounter a character who you really do not like in a book, well, then you need to take a look at what it is that you don't like about them. And what is that saying about you? Why do they annoy you? What is it that they're doing differently? And it's been very interesting reading people's reactions to Rosie and Grounded, because I know what I had her do and why. And I know what the next 2 books are, so I really know what I had her do and why. But they don't have that same insight. And some of the stuff that she did, some of the stuff her parents did has really upset people. And I'm kind of amazed because, once the book is out there, it's not mine anymore. It belongs to you and the voices that you bring to it when you read. So I don't know if it's just that I'm getting older and paying more attention to this stuff. I don't know. It was fascinating. It has, when I say kerfuffle, I'm actually probably minimizing the swirl of crazy that broke over this woman. And I'm bringing it up because of Margaret. So there's actually a reason why I'm bringing this up. There were people who posted comments after her commentary on the movie Frozen, basically saying you deserve to die kinds of things. And other people who said, you're not alone, other people agree with you. But lots of angry people. And of course, once people get angry, then they start sharing it with friends. And then those friends go and they read it or don't and leave angry comments. It became really clear that a lot of people hadn't read her entire post. And it's long and she kind of rambles. But the thing that struck me was her blog title is Frozen, Not Gonna Let It Go, which is a song from the movie, when movie advocates gay agenda. Okay, now for those of you who have seen the movie Frozen, that was probably not the first thing you thought of when you saw this film. Probably the first thing you thought of was, whoa, that's a Disney movie where the girl doesn't wind up having to get married at the end to have a happy ending? Wow, what a difference. And maybe I hadn't noticed what a difference that would make until I saw Frozen. And some people have actually posted about what an incredibly Christian movie it is, because there's a big sacrificing scene at one point in the movie. And so people have opinions, right? But what was interesting to me reading the comments, not just reading the post, but reading the comments, is that there were a lot of assumptions being made about this woman, partially because of the name of her blog, The Well-Behaved Mormon Woman, partially because she's very clearly pinpointing a liberal/gay agenda coming out of Hollywood. And that triggers all sorts of things for some people. The fact that she was explicating a film through a very particular lens. Now, the reason I bring this up is because this is what I really try not to do on CraftLit. And those of you who have been with me for a long time know that I'm very happy to have people write in with their interpretations and things like that. But for me, my job, I feel, is not to come from only a feminist perspective or a master-slave relationship perspective or colonialist perspective or whatever. I try to bring you guys, well, here's what was going on at the time, and here's the history, and here's what we know from that author as being some biases. Like with Mark Twain, you get a lot of that kind of information. But, if you go back all the way back to The Turn of the Screw, I mean, I definitely had my reading of that book. And Julie Davis at Forgotten Classics, and God bless her for writing to me, had a very different opinion. And I know that listeners did too. And so we had kind of two different points of view, perfectly valid, had lots of data for both of those points of view. And the marvelous thing about CraftLit people is that we all seem to be perfectly comfortable being people of goodwill and having completely different opinions about what stuff in that book meant. Disagreements, sure, but that doesn't mean, it certainly doesn't mean that I was walking around going, oh, Julie, I can't believe she'd say something like that. It's like, oh, wow, that's really interesting. It makes me think more about, like, well, what is it about me that doesn't make me see that first? I bring this up because I had my own reaction to the Frozen post, but something about the way she wrote, there was one line where she said, you have to understand, I don't have a problem with gays. This isn't about that. And I started looking at it going, it's true. She's not like trying to lead a boycott. She's not trying to get you to not see the movie. She saw it 3 times and said she enjoyed it every time. She's taken all of her grandkids. So I started following other links on her post. And I found out she's a mother of 5. She was married when she was 18. Her husband's wonderful. Her kids are wonderful. Her grandkids are wonderful. She never went to college, but she's not a horrible writer. She could have used an editor, but who among us could throw the first stone on that one? And then I got to the About Me section where she talked about the fact that one of her daughters is a lesbian. And I stopped because now she is no longer even remotely in a category. And I think this was the interesting thing, because Margaret has her own prejudices and biases, maybe even stronger and narrower ones than the people in Pride and Prejudice. And those initial reactions that are based on our casual and sometimes not so casual cataloging, in our brain of this is what those people are like. This is the stuff that drives me crazy on Facebook. And I hide posts from friends who I love if they put up something that's categorizing a group of people who I know to be far more complex than the post is indicating. Because exactly of this, and exactly because I don't want to play Margaret's game. And you're going to see more of it today. And then I thought, well, actually, for this Well-Behaved Mormon Women blogspot site, she's doing what so many college students do. She's looking through a lens, and she is finding what she's looking for. A lot of the themes that she sees as gay could easily be put into the camp of this is what adolescents go through, feeling because of peer pressure that they can't be who they really are and that they have to hide who they are. And anyway, it goes on. So it recalled for me that Jack and Jilling thing that I've talked about on the podcast before, the article that my AP English teacher gave us in high school about looking at the children's rhyme, Jack and Jill Went Up the Hill, and talking about how it's really the deflowering of a girl and all of this crazy stuff that if you're looking for it, you're going to find it, and you're going to find a way to make it fit. To that end, I wanted to throw this out there because this is also coming up all over the interwebs right now. I am currently doing a project where I am having to spend my days reading Common Core English standards and then coming up with ways to teach to those standards. I was hired to do this because these are pretty much the goals and standards that I had set for myself for teaching back when I was still in a high school classroom. There are things being said about the Common Core standards, and I have no skin in the game. I mean, I'm going to get paid for writing this stuff no matter what. So I am not teaching in a Common Core state. I don't really care. All I've paid attention to for the last 3 weeks is the English standards themselves. If you have any questions about what's really in them, please email me, heather@craftlit.com. And if you're in a Common Core state and scared, let me know, because at least with the English standards, I can probably clear some things up. So that goes along with the point I was getting around to with the Well-Behaved Mormon Woman blog post and Margaret and the Common Core, is we have certain expectations around pigeonholes that we have assigned to people, to groups, to issues, to topics. And it's so much easier for us to live being comfortable putting things into those groups. But CraftLit has taught me many, many things, and getting to know listeners at CraftLit has taught me many, many things. And one of those things is no one is that completely pigeonholable. Margaret hasn't learned that yet. And the people who wrote comments without having really read the blog post haven't figured that out yet. And a lot of the screaming I'm hearing about the Common Core stuff, a lot of that screaming is being done by people who haven't read the standards themselves. In today's chapters, and as we move forward, you're going to hear Margaret saying things that I now look at from my ripe old age of 46 as being exactly the kinds of things I would have said when I was her age too. And I look at Margaret and I look at myself at that age and I am horrified. I think I probably spoke with a great deal of confidence, and I'm tall, so people listened. But oh my goodness, I just didn't get people yet. Now, there isn't much to deal with in advance of today's chapters. However, there is one. Register offices. Margaret spends a lot of time going to register offices. This is because they are still trying to find servants. And register offices would have been like today's, there's like a identified corner. I don't know how it's identified, but everybody seems to know where it is, where guys who are able to do physical labor hang out and wait for trucks to come by and say, hey, I've got a job for 4 guys, and pick them up and take them. It's a cash-based business, and it would have been pretty much the same. But this is what Margaret's main job has been. They still haven't found a servant yet because, of course, you could do easier work, which is not saying much. If you've ever seen one of those like 1811 houses where they have the scullery maid and the scullery maids keep quitting because it's a really, really hard job, they could get easier work for better wages at a factory. So why would you be a servant if you didn't have to be? So aside from that one term, which I was unfamiliar with, I think everything else is going to register with you. So today we listened to chapter 11 and 12. We have a lot to talk about when they're over because a lot happens. All right? So here we go. Chapters 11 and 12 of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell.
Chapter 11. First Impressions. There's iron, they say, in all our blood, and a grain or two perhaps is good. But he makes me harshly feel, has got a little too much of steel. Anonymous. Margaret, said Mr. Hale as he returned from showing his guest downstairs. I could not help watching your face with some anxiety when Mr. Thornton made his confession of having been a shop boy. I knew it all along from Mr. Bell, so I was aware of what was coming, but I half expected to see you get up and leave the room. Oh, Papa, you don't mean that you thought me so silly? I really liked that account of himself better than anything else he said. Everything else revolted me from its hardness. But he spoke about himself so simply, with so little of the pretense that makes the vulgarity of shop people, and with such tender respect for his mother, that I was less likely to leave the room than when he was boasting about Milton as if there was not such another place in the world, or quietly professing to despise people for careless, wasteful improvidence, without ever seeming to think it his duty to try to make them different, to give them anything of the training which his mother gave him, and to which he evidently owes his position, whatever that may be. No, his statement of having been a shop boy was the thing I liked best of all. I am surprised at you, Margaret, said her mother. You who were always accusing people of being shoppy at Helston. I don't think, Mr. Hale, you have done quite right in introducing such a person to us without telling us what he had been. I really was very much afraid of showing him how much shocked I was at some parts of what he said. His father dying in miserable circumstances. Why, it might have been in the workhouse. I am not sure if it was not worse than being in the workhouse, replied her husband. I heard a good deal of his previous life from Mr. Bell before we came here, and, as he has told you apart, I will fill up what he left out. His father speculated wildly, failed, and then killed himself because he could not bear the disgrace. All his former friends shrunk from the disclosures that had to be made of his dishonest gambling, wild, hopeless struggles made with other people's money to regain his own moderate portion of wealth. No one came forwards to help the mother and this boy. There was another child, I believe, a girl, too young to earn money, but of course she had to be kept. At least, no friend came forward immediately, and Mrs. Thornton is not one, I fancy, to wait till tardy kindness comes to find her out. So they left Milton. I knew he had gone into a shop, and that his earnings with some fragment of property secured to his mother had been made to keep them for a long time. Mr. Bell said they absolutely lived upon water porridge for years. How, he did not know, but long after the creditors had given up hope of any payment of old Mr. Thornton's debts, if indeed they ever had hoped at all about it after his suicide, this young man returned to Milton and went quietly round to each creditor, paying him the first installment of the money owing to him.
No noise. No gathering together of creditors. It was done very silently and quietly, but all was paid at last, helped on materially by the circumstance of one of the creditors, a crabbed old fellow, Mr. Bell says, taking in Mr. Thornton as a kind of partner.
That really is fine, said Margaret. What a pity such a nature should be tainted by his position as a Milton manufacturer.
How tainted? Asked her father.
Oh, Papa, by that testing everything by the standard of wealth. When he spoke of the mechanical powers, he evidently looked upon them only as new ways of extending trade and making money. And the poor men around him, they were poor because they were vicious, out of the pale of his sympathies because they had not his iron nature and the capabilities that it gives him for being rich.
Not vicious. He never said that. Improvident and self-indulgent were his words.
Margaret was collecting her mother's working materials and preparing to go to bed. Just as she was leaving the room, she hesitated. She was inclined to make an acknowledgment which she thought would please her father, but which, to be full and true, must include a little annoyance. However, out it came. Papa, I do think Mr. Thornton a very remarkable man, but personally I do not like him at all.
And I do, said her father, laughing. Personally, as you call it. And all. I don't set him up for a hero or anything of that kind. But good night, child. Your mother looks sadly tired tonight, Margaret.
Margaret had noticed her mother's jaded appearance with anxiety for some time past, and this remark of her father sent her up to bed with a dim fear lying like a weight on her heart. The life in Milton was so different from what Mrs. Hale had been accustomed to live in Helston, in and out perpetually into the fresh and open air. The air itself was so different. Deprived of all revivifying principle as it seemed to be here, the domestic worries pressed so very closely and in so new and sordid a form upon all the women in the family that there was good reason to fear that her mother's health might be becoming seriously affected. There were several other signs of something wrong about Mrs. Hale. She and Dixon held mysterious consultations in her bedroom, from which Dixon would come out crying and cross, as was her custom, when any distress of her mistress called upon her sympathy. Once Margaret had gone into the chamber soon after Dixon left it, and found her mother on her knees, and as Margaret stole out she caught a few words, which were evidently a prayer for strength and patience to endure severe bodily suffering. Margaret yearned to reunite the bond of intimate confidence which had been broken by her long residence at her Aunt Shaw's, and strove by gentle caresses and softened words to creep into the warmest place in her mother's heart. But though she received caresses and fond words back again in such profusion as would have gladdened her formerly, yet she felt that there was a secret withheld from her, and she believed it bore serious reference to her mother's health. She lay awake very long this night, planning how to lessen the evil influence of their Milton life on her mother. A servant to give Dixon permanent assistance should be got if she gave up her whole time to the search, and then, at any rate, her mother might have all the personal attention she required and had been accustomed to her whole life. Visiting register offices, seeing all manner of unlikely people, and very few in the least likely, absorbed Margaret's time and thoughts for several days. One afternoon she met Bessie Higgins in the street and stopped to speak to her. "Well, Bessie, how are you? Better, I hope, now the wind has changed." "Better and not better, if you know what that means." "Not exactly," replied Margaret, smiling. "I'm better in not being torn to pieces by coughing o' nights, but I'm weary and tired o' Milton and longing to get away to the land o' Beulah. And when I think I'm farther and farther off, my heart sinks, and I'm no better. I'm worse." Margaret turned round to walk alongside of the girl in her feeble progress homeward. But for a minute or two she did not speak. At last she said in a low voice, "Bessie, Do you wish to die?" For she shrank from death herself with all the clinging to life so natural to the young and healthy. Bessie was silent in her turn for a minute or two. Then she replied, "If you'd led the life I have, and getten as weary of it as I have, and thought at times, maybe it'll last for 50 or 60 years. It does with some, and got dizzy and dazed and sick as each of them 60 years seemed to spin about me and mock me with its length of hours and minutes and endless bits of time. Oh, wench, I tell thee thou'd been glad enough when the doctor said he feared thou'd never see another winter." "Why, Bessie, what kind of a life has yours been?" "Not worse than many others, I reckon, only I fretted again it, and they didn't." "But what was it? You know, I'm a stranger here, so perhaps I'm not so quick at understanding what you mean, as if I'd lived all my life at Milton." "If you'd a come to our house when you said you would, I could maybe a told you. But father says you're just like the rest on 'em. It's out o' sight, out o' mind with you." "I don't know who the rest are, and I've been very busy, and, to tell the truth, I had forgotten my promise." "You offered it. We asked none of it." "I had forgotten what I said for the time," continued Margaret quietly. "I should have thought of it again when I was less busy. May I go with you now?" Bessie gave a quick glance at Margaret's face to see if the wish expressed was really felt. The sharpness in her eye turned to a wistful longing as she met Margaret's soft and friendly gaze. "I ha' none so many to care for me. If you care, you may come." So they walked on together in silence. As they turned up into a small court opening out of a squalid street, Bessie said, "You'll not be daunted if father's at home and speaks a bit gruffish at first. He took a mind to you, you see, and he thought a deal o' your coming to see us, and just because he liked you, he were vexed and put about." "Don't fear, Bessie." But Nicholas was not at home when they entered. A great slatternly girl, not so old as Bessie, but taller and stronger, was busy at the wash-tub, knocking about the furniture in a rough, capable way, but altogether making so much noise that Margaret shrunk out of sympathy with poor Bessie, who had sat down on the first chair as if completely tired out with her walk. Margaret asked the sister for a cup of water, and while she ran to fetch it, knocking down the fire-irons and tumbling over a chair in her way, she unloosed Bessie's bonnet strings to relieve her catching breath. "Do you think such a life as this is worth caring for?" gasped Bessie at last. Margaret did not speak, but held the water to her lips. Bessie took a long and feverish draught, and then fell back and shut her eyes. Margaret heard her murmur to herself, "They shall hunger no more, neither thirst any more. Neither shall the sun light on them, nor any heat." Margaret bent over and said, "Bessie, don't be impatient with your life, whatever it is or may have been. Remember who gave it to you, and made it what it is." She was startled by hearing Nicholas speak behind her. He had come in without her noticing him.
"Now, not have my wench preached to. She's bad enough as it is, with her dreams and her Methody fancies, and her visions of cities with golden gates and precious stones. But if it amuses her, I'll let it be. But I'm none going to have more stuff poured into her."
"But surely," said Margaret, facing round, "you believe in what I said, that God gave her life and ordered what kind of life it was to be."
"I believe what I see and no more. That's what I believe, young woman. I don't believe all I hear, no, not by a big deal. I did hear a young lass making ado about knowing where we lived and coming to see us, and my wench here thought a deal about it and flushed up many a time when her little knew I was looking at her at the sound of a strange step. But her's come at last, and her's welcome as long as her keep from preaching on what her knows naught about."
Bessie had been watching Margaret's face. She half sat up to speak now, laying her hand on Margaret's arm with a gesture of entreaty. "Don't be vexed with him. There's many a one thinks like him, many and many a one here. If you could hear them speak, you'd not be shocked at him. He's a rare good man, his father, but oh," said she, falling back in despair, "what he says at times makes me long to die more than ever, for I want to know so many things, and am so tossed about wi' wonder." "Poor wench, poor old wench. I'm loath to vex thee, I am. But a man mun speak out for the truth, and when I see the world going all wrong at this time o' day, bothering itself with things it knows naught about, and leaving undone all the things that lie in disorder close at its hand, why, I say, leave this talk about religion alone, and set to work on what you see and know. That's my creed. It's simple, and not far to fetch nor hard to work." But the girl only pleaded the more with Margaret. "Don't think hardly on him. He's a good man, he is. I sometimes think I shall be moped with sorrow even in the city of God if father is not there." The feverish colour came into her cheek, and the feverish flame into her eye. "But you will be there, father. You shall. Oh, my heart." She put her hand to it and became ghastly pale. Margaret held her in her arms and put the weary head to rest upon her bosom. She lifted the thin, soft hair from off the temples and bathed them with water. Nicholas understood all her signs for different articles with the quickness of love, and even the round-eyed sister moved with laborious gentleness at Margaret's "hush." Presently, the spasm that foreshadowed death had passed away, and Bessie roused herself and said, "I'll go to bed. It's the best place, but," catching at Margaret's gown, "you come again. I know you will, but just say it." "I will come tomorrow," said Margaret. Bessie leaned back against her father, who prepared to carry her upstairs. But as Margaret rose to go, he struggled to say something. "I could wish there were a God, if it were only to ask him to bless thee." Margaret went away very sad and thoughtful. She was late for tea at home. At Helston, unpunctuality at mealtimes was a great fault in her mother's eyes, but now this, as well as many other little irregularities, seemed to have lost their power of irritation, and Margaret almost longed for the old complainings. "Have you met with a servant, dear?" "No, mamma. That Anne Buckley would never have done."
"Suppose I try," said Mr. Hale. "Everybody else has had their turn at this great difficulty. Now let me try. I may be the Cinderella to put on the slipper after all."
Margaret could hardly smile at this little joke, so oppressed was she by her visit to the Higginses.
"What would you do, Papa? How would you set about it?"
"Why, I would apply to some good house-mother to recommend me one known to herself or her servants."
"Very good, but we must first catch our house-mother."
"You have caught her, or rather she is coming into the snare, and you will catch her tomorrow if you're skillful."
"What do you mean, Mr. Hale?" asked his wife, her curiosity aroused.
"Why, my paragon pupil, as Margaret calls him, has told me that his mother intends to call on Mrs. and Miss Hale tomorrow."
"Mrs. Thornton?" exclaimed Mrs. Hale.
"The mother of whom he spoke to us?" said Margaret.
"Mrs. Thornton, the only mother he has, I believe," said Mr. Hale quietly.
"I shall like to see her. She must be an uncommon person," her mother added. "Perhaps she may have a relation who might suit us and be glad of our place. She sounded to be such a careful, economical person that I should like any one out of the same family."
"My dear," said Mr. Hale, alarmed, "pray don't go off on that idea. I fancy Mrs. Thornton is as haughty and proud in her way as our little Margaret here is in hers, and that she completely ignores that old time of trial and poverty and economy of which he speaks so openly. I am sure, at any rate, she would not like strangers to know anything about it.
Take notice that is not my kind of haughtiness, Papa, if I have any at all which I don't agree to, though you're always accusing me of it.
I don't know positively that it is hers either, but from little things I have gathered from him, I fancy so.
They cared too little to ask in what manner her son had spoken about her. Margaret only wanted to know if she must stay in to receive this call, as it would prevent her going to see how Bessie was until late in the day, since the early morning was always occupied in household affairs. And then she recollected that her mother must not be left to have the whole weight of entertaining her visitor.
End of Chapter 11.
Chapter 12. Morning Calls.
Well, I suppose we must.
Friends in Council.
Mr. Thornton had had some difficulty in working up his mother to the desired point of civility. She did not often make calls, and when she did, it was in heavy state that she went through her duties. Her son had given her a carriage, but she refused to let him keep horses for it. They were hired for the solemn occasions when she paid morning or evening visits. She had had horses for 3 days, not a fortnight before, and had comfortably killed off all her acquaintances who might now put themselves to trouble and expense in their turn. Yet Crampton was too far off for her to walk, and she had repeatedly questioned her son as to whether his wish that she should call on the Hales was strong enough to bear the expense of cab hire. She would have been thankful if it had not, for, as she said, she saw no use in making up friendships and intimacies with all the teachers and masters in Milton. Why, he would be wanting her to call on Fanny's dancing master's wife the next thing. And so I would, Mother, if Mr. Mason and his wife were friendless in a strange place like the Hales. Oh, you need not speak so hastily. I am going tomorrow. I only wanted you exactly to understand about it. If you are going tomorrow, I shall order horses. Nonsense, John. One would think you were made of money. Not quite yet, but about the horses I'm determined. The last time you were out in a cab, you came home with a headache from the jolting. I never complained of it, I'm sure. No, my mother is not given to complaints, said he, a little proudly. But so much the more I have to watch over you. Now, as for Fanny there, a little hardship would do her good. She is not made of the same stuff as you are, John. She could not bear it. Mrs. Thornton was silent after this, for her last words bore relation to a subject which mortified her. She had an unconscious contempt for a weak character, and Fanny was weak in the very points in which her mother and brother were strong. Mrs. Thornton was not a woman much given to reasoning. Her quick judgment and firm resolution served her in good stead of any long arguments and discussions with herself. She felt instinctively that nothing could strengthen Fanny to endure hardships patiently or face difficulties bravely. And though she winced as she made this acknowledgment to herself about her daughter, it only gave her a kind of pitying tenderness of manner towards her, much of the same description of demeanour with which mothers are wont to treat their weak and sickly children. A stranger, a careless observer, might have considered that Mrs. Thornton's manner to her children betokened far more love to Fanny than to John. But such a one would have been deeply mistaken. The very daringness with which mother and son spoke out unpalatable truths, the one to the other, showed a reliance on the firm centre of each other's souls, which the uneasy tenderness of Mrs. Thornton's manner to her daughter, the shame with which she thought to hide the poverty of her child and all the grand qualities which she herself possessed unconsciously,
and which she set so high a value upon in others. This shame, I say, betrayed the want of a secure resting place for her affection. She never called her son by any name but John. Love and dear and such like terms were reserved for Fanny. But her heart gave thanks for him day and night, and she walked proudly among women for his sake. "Fanny, dear, I shall have horses to the carriage today to go and call on these Hales. Should not you go and see nurse? It's in the same direction, and she's always so glad to see you. You could go on there while I'm at Mrs. Hale's."
Oh, Mamma, it's such a long way, and I'm so tired.
"With what?" asked Mrs. Thornton, her brow slightly contracting.
I don't know. The weather, I think. It is so relaxing. Couldn't you bring nurse here, Mamma? The carriage could fetch her, and she could spend the rest of the day here, which I know she would like.
Mrs. Thornton did not speak, but she laid her work on the table and seemed to think. "It will be a long way for her to walk back at night," she remarked at last.
Oh, but I will send her home in a cab. I never thought of her walking.
At this point, Mr. Thornton came in, just before going to the mill. "Mother, I need hardly say that if there is any little thing that could serve Mrs. Hale as an invalid, you will offer it, I'm sure." "If I can find it out, I will. But I have never been ill myself, so I'm not much up to invalids' fancies."
Well, here is Fanny, then, who is seldom without an ailment. She will be able to suggest something, perhaps, won't you, Fan? I have not always an ailment, said Fanny pettishly, and I'm not going with Mamma. I have a headache today, and I shan't go out.
Mr. Thornton looked annoyed. His mother's eyes were bent on her work, at which she was now stitching away busily. "Fanny, I wish you to go," said he authoritatively. "It would do you good instead of harm. You will oblige me by going, without my saying anything more about it." He went abruptly out of the room after saying this. If he had stayed a minute longer, Fanny would have cried at his tone of command, even when he used the words, "You will oblige me." As it was, she grumbled,
"John always speaks as if I fancied I was ill, and I'm sure I never do fancy any such thing. Who are these Hales that he makes such a fuss about?"
"Fanny, don't speak so of your brother. He has good reasons of some kind or other, or he would not wish us to go. Make haste and put your things on." But the little altercation between her son and her daughter did not incline Mrs. Thornton more favourably towards these Hales. Her jealous heart repeated her daughter's question, "Who are they, that he is so anxious we should pay them all this attention?" It came up like a burden to a song, long after Fanny had forgotten all about it in the pleasant excitement of seeing the effect of a new bonnet in the looking-glass. Mrs. Thornton was shy. It was only of late years that she had had leisure enough in her life to go into society, and as society she did not enjoy it. As dinner-giving, and as criticizing other people's dinners, she took satisfaction in it. But this going to make acquaintance with strangers was a very different thing. She was ill at ease, and looked more than usually stern and forbidding as she entered the Hales' little drawing-room. Margaret was busy embroidering a small piece of cambric for some little article of dress for Edith's expected baby. "Flimsy, useless work," as Mrs. Thornton observed to herself. She liked Mrs. Hale's double knitting far better. That was sensible of its kind. The room altogether was full of knick-knacks, which must take a long time to dust, and time to people of limited income was money. She made all these reflections as she was talking in her stately way to Mrs. Hale, and uttering all the stereotyped commonplaces that most people can find to say with their senses blindfolded. Mrs. Hale was making rather more exertion in her answers, captivated by some real old lace which Mrs. Thornton wore.
"Lace?
as she afterwards observed to Dixon, of that old English point which has not been made for this 70 years, and which cannot be bought. It must have been an heirloom, and shows that she had ancestors. So the owner of the ancestral lace became worthy of something more than the languid exertion to be agreeable to a visitor, by which Mrs. Hale's efforts at conversation would have been otherwise bounded. And presently Margaret, racking her brain to talk to Fanny, heard her mother and Mrs. Thornton plunge into the interminable subject of servants.
"I suppose you are not musical," said Fanny, "as I see no piano."
"I am fond of hearing good music. I cannot play well myself, and Papa and Mamma don't care much about it, so we sold our old piano when we came here." "I wonder how you can exist without one. It almost seems to me a necessary of life." 15 shillings a week and 3 saved out of them, thought Margaret to herself. But she must have been very young. She probably has forgotten her own personal experience. But she must know of those days. Margaret's manner had an extra tinge of coldness in it when she next spoke. "You have good concerts here, I believe." "Oh, yes, delicious. Too crowded. That is the worst. The directors admit so indiscriminately, but one is sure to hear the newest music there. I always have a large order to give to Johnson's the day after a concert." "Do you like new music simply for its newness, then?" "Oh, one knows it is the fashion in London, or else the singers would not bring it down here. You have been in London, of course?" "Yes," said Margaret. "I have lived there for several years." "Oh, London and the Alhambra are the 2 places I long to see." "London and the Alhambra?" "Yes, ever since I read the tales of the Alhambra. Don't you know them?" "I don't think I do, but surely it is a very easy journey to London." "Yes, but somehow," said Fanny, lowering her voice, "Mamma has never been to London herself and can't understand my longing. She is very proud of Milton, dirty, smoky place as I feel it to be. I believe she admires it the more for those very qualities." "If it has been Mrs. Thornton's home for some years, I can well understand her loving it," said Margaret in her clear, bell-like voice. "What are you saying about me, Miss Hale, may I inquire?" Margaret had not the words ready for an answer to this question, which took her a little by surprise, so Miss Thornton replied,
"Oh, Mamma, we're only trying to account for your being so fond of Milton."
"Thank you," said Mrs. Thornton. "I do not feel that my very natural liking for the place where I was born and brought up, and which has since been my residence for some years, requires any accounting for." Margaret was vexed. As Fanny had put it, it did seem as if they had been impertinently discussing Mrs. Thornton's feelings, but she also rose up against that lady's manner of showing that she was offended. Mrs. Thornton went on after a moment's pause. "Do you know anything of Milton, Miss Hale? Have you seen any of our factories, our magnificent warehouses?" "No," said Margaret. "I have not seen anything of that description as yet." Then she felt that by concealing her utter indifference to all such places, she was hardly speaking with truth, so she went on. "I dare say Papa would have taken me before now if I had cared, but I really do not find much pleasure in going over manufactories." "They are very curious places," said Mrs. Hale, "but there is so much noise and dirt always. I remember once going in a lilac silk to see candles made, and my gown was utterly ruined." "Very probably," said Mrs. Thornton in a short, displeased manner. "I merely thought that, as strangers newly come to reside in a town which has risen to eminence in the country, from the character and progress of its peculiar business, you might have cared to visit some of the places where it is carried on,
places unique in the kingdom, I am informed. If Miss Hale changes her mind and condescends to be curious as to the manufactures of Milton, I can only say I shall be glad to procure her admission to print works, or reed-making, or the more simple operations of spinning carried on in Miss Son's mill. Every improvement of machinery is, I believe, to be seen there in its highest perfection.
I'm so glad you don't like mills and manufactories and all those kind of things, said Fanny in a half-whisper as she rose to accompany her mother, who was taking leave of Mrs. Hale with rustling dignity. I think I should like to know all about them if I were you, replied Margaret quietly.
Fanny, said her mother as they drove away, we will be civil to those Hales, but don't form one of your hasty friendships with the daughter. She will do you no good, I see. The mother looks very ill, and seems a nice, quiet kind of person.
I don't want to form any friendship with Miss Hale, Mamma, said Fanny, pouting. I thought I was doing my duty by talking to her and trying to amuse her.
Well, at any rate, John must be satisfied now.
So one of the things that's always interesting about first-person narrative, which this isn't, but one of the things that's interesting is that you have to hear from other people what may not be made completely crystalline from the first-person narration. And, I mean, we've gotten a pretty good picture of Margaret, sure, but her father refers to her haughtiness, and Margaret very haughtily denies being haughty at all. And I thought, oh, yeah, Gaskell put that in there, because if we hadn't had it made clear enough to us yet, we needed to get it before the end of these chapters. And not only that, but did you catch the word revulsion? She used the word revulsion. And I thought, why would you use that when you're talking about people in Milton, Mr. Thornton? And I realized, oh, it's not, the revulsion isn't really about the shoppiness and the factory thing and the making money, which would perhaps be vulgar, but not something that you would feel revulsion for. And then I thought, oh, last year when Larry Uffelman and I spoke, he talked about how if a modern reader were reading this instead of listening to it or seeing it in the miniseries, that they would miss a ton of information because they wouldn't get how disturbing the northern accent was to Margaret. That it's the accent that makes a lot of her reaction more pronounced. So if you were wondering about that's a piece of it that at least with Americans would get lost on us. So that's one thing. But then I found this pair of chapters to be fascinating. Did you catch the stuff about the horses? It was a real insight into a quote unquote regular family or a middle class or an upper middle class family that you wouldn't, and especially a city family, you wouldn't own your own horses. You'd have to hire them out. It's like having a zip car nowadays. And I thought, oh, wow, so many of the books that I read when I was younger were all country estate books, or at least country books. All of Jane Austen's stuff is more or less country-ish, except for, well, Bath takes a chunk out of a couple of her books, but horses are just there, and so people have carriages if they're lucky enough, or they walk everywhere. But here, Mama Thornton has to hire the horses. I thought that was very interesting. I also thought the reference to how much pain she was in when she came home from the hired coach, I thought, ooh, well, that tells us a lot about the suspension on publicly run carriages, which would probably be pretty run down, to privately owned carriages where you could pay to have the suspension kept a little bit less bumpy. So I thought that was really cool. I love Mrs. Thornton, and I think the relationship between her and John and her relationship between her and Franny the description of how and why those relationships are different for her, and that she's kind of aware of what she's done. I thought that was so, well, honestly, so modern, because you see it. And, a lot of us hope we're not doing stuff like that. But Mrs. Thornton is, again, one of these people who just doesn't fit the pigeonhole. And yet the pigeonhole is all that Margaret sees. And it's just so interesting. I'm sure Miss Gaskell would have named this Pride and Prejudice if she had had an opportunity to, because that's so much of what's going on here. Now, I've been getting questions about the miniseries, and the book goes into this so much deeper than the miniseries does, especially with Mrs. Thornton's character. But there's 4 parts to the miniseries, and I would say, yes, you can watch the first part safely. There's some action that isn't in the first part of the book. I don't think it'll spoil anything for you, and I actually think it's pretty important at this point, if you've never seen amazing technology that was being handled in 1850, especially for Americans. This is pre-Civil War. It's shocking to see this kind of technology raging in the 1850s, and it was happening earlier. But the other reason that it might not be a bad idea to watch at least that first episode is because of Bessie. Bessie's illness doesn't make a whole lot of sense to us, because she's not working in toxic fumes. She hasn't been working in toxic fumes. And yet she has these horrible racking coughs. And it's the fluff. And you'll hear more about this. There will be much more discussion about this. It's very well presented visually in the first episode of the miniseries. But you can see the amount of cotton fluff that is flying around these rooms. You inhaled it. You couldn't not inhale it. And so if you start working in the factory as a child, you are going to inhale a lot of it into growing lungs, which can't be good. It's not asbestos, of course, but it's not good. And so there's that whole level of stuff going on underneath everything. And bringing up Bessie, I think her father says it. He says it very quickly and in passing. Her attention in the Bible is focused quite heavily on being able to go to heaven. And that's really all she's looking forward to now. And I thought her description of it was heartbreaking, that every time she starts to get better, she thinks, oh God, it's going to take that much longer now for me to get to heaven. And that's horrifies Margaret. But I just think, wow, to be that sick. I mean, to believe that strongly, how wonderful for her, how settling it has to be. She's clearly made her peace with going, which I don't know how many people could do. But she's also clearly upset her father enough that he just kind of nods and says, well, I let her go when she gets like this. It makes her feel better. But he's not looking forward to losing her. And evidently during this time of dissension in the religious groups in England, the Methodists were a little more Book of Revelation-y at the time. So we're going to hear stuff about that, and I will be looking up more about that. I'm still trying to find a religious scholar who's comfortable giving me details about this. It's very hard to find, but that's coming. Did you catch the reference to double knitting? Margaret was doing embroidery, and Mrs. Thornton approved more of Mrs. Hale's double knitting because, of course, it makes more sense in that climate to have something nice and warm. I also loved that Fanny's and John's conversation where John refers to her as an invalid, and she says, I am not, but I don't want to go out. My head hurts. I thought, Gaskell's good. She's funny. The reference that Fanny made, she made a couple of interesting references. One was to the day after a concert, she sent a large order out to a music shop. And this is because she plays piano a lot. And this would just be like going to a record store and buying a record, or going to Amazon and buying a CD, or going to iTunes and getting MP3 downloads after going to a concert. Oh, I liked that music. I like that song. I want to get that. And so she would get the sheet music so that she could play it at home. Her comment about wanting to go to London and to Alhambras in Spain, and her Tales of the Alhambra was probably referencing incorrectly Legends of the Alhambra by Washington Irving. Yay, Washington Irving. But I think Gaskell has her get the title wrong on purpose. You know. I also loved how Mrs. Thornton's pride in the machinery. You know, she's like a tech geek. She thinks the miracle of industrialization of the North was fantastic and that the machinery was awesome. And again, if you go and you watch the video, it's on Netflix, you can stream it, of the first part, don't watch past that, the first part of North and South, you see this machinery in action, and it's crazy loud, which when we went on the CraftLit Nitty trip, we got to see one of these machines, a very large machine, working, and one of them was really crazy loud, but it's also just insanely cool to see how this all works. So there's the pride in the machinery, and then that's coupled with Margaret saying, you know, well, I can't let this moment go by without being truthful. I need to be truthful about this. And so she insults Mrs. If I had any interest in going to those places, I'm sure I could. And I thought, oh, Margaret, you're so young. This would have been one of those moments when keeping your mouth shut would have been just fine. But no, she had to be honest. I think honesty is overrated. The older I get, the more I think honesty is really overrated. Does this make me look fat? No, it doesn't. That's the correct answer. So yeah, Margaret. Well, anyway. I am going to go pack a few more boxes and write a few more lines, and then I will be back with you next week with the next installment of North and South by Elizabeth Gaskell. Have a great week. I'll talk to you soon. Bye. 339, chapters 13 and 14 of North and South. Welcome to CraftLit, the podcast for crafters who love books. My name is Heather Ordover, and I'm podcasting from where the Delaware River meets the Old York Road, New Hope, Pennsylvania. Episode 339, Mitts. Well, hello. It is I, Heather, and I am freaking out today. I am going to go speak to the Prince William Pearlers tonight, but I have spent the last, I am not joking, 4 out of 7 days at the computer repair shop. I tried so hard to podcast last night, and that didn't happen, and didn't happen earlier, and oh my goodness. Crazy times. And then 2 out of the last 7 days I also spent at the car shop. I tell you what, I have had enough of things breaking. And now I have a new computer, which I wasn't expecting to have to buy. But there it is. I kind of had to have one that worked. So you are listening to a new podcast on a new computer. Congratulations. But as a consequence of the crazy, I have some quick things to get through, and then we'll talk about the book. I got an interesting series of emails about the Bleak House files on the downloading site. We were trying to troubleshoot some weirdness that had happened with the downloading. If you are a downloading subscriber and you ever find that you are having a difficult time getting the file to unzip properly, try right-clicking it and download the file as, and then you can name it whatever you want to name it, or just make sure that you download it to your desktop and then open it from there. Or try right-clicking on the file itself and seeing if it gives you the option to decompress it again. We're finding that there seems to be some computers have this weird multi-step decompression thing that they want to do. So that's one thing. The second thing is I'm going to be going through and renaming the Bleak House streaming files as per the request of a listener to make it a little bit easier for you to sort and find them. She's brilliant, and what she'd been doing was going through and starring all of the Bleak House episodes and then listening off of the starred list. I know, right? And that way she was able to hear them all in order without having to find them in the midst of all of the regular episodes. So, genius move on her part, and I will be renaming those episodes, the Bleak House episodes, to try and facilitate that move as well. So 2 things crossed my line of vision this week, and they both relate to this aspect of the book about us, or the people in the book, but people in general too, not being able to see people for who they really are outside of the category that we have placed them in before we've gotten to know them. And one of them is a fascinating article on the Waco compound David Koresh thing. If you are, older than 35, probably, you remember this thing that happened in the early 90s, mid 90s. It was horrible. And I don't know about you, but I never got a really clear picture of what happened. There was a religious group. They were part of the Seventh-day Adventist group. They'd broken off. They were called the Branch Davidians. They had a compound in Waco, Texas, and the FBI had gotten intel that they were hoarding guns. See, I don't even remember this. Hoarding guns and converting them to automatic weapons. There was some weird something that they thought was going on. And it just escalated and got out of control real fast and wound up killing a lot of them in a horrible, horrible fire, which interestingly, that part I just did find out. That was because they put, I believe it was tear gas, or the gas that they used was flammable, and they shot the canisters through the walls into rooms that had candles and Coleman lanterns. So it wasn't one of those purposeful things. It was really just horrible. It was horrible. They thought Koresh was like a Charles Manson, that these people had been brainwashed, that they were there against their will, that it was an ugly cult, that they thought it was going to be like that. What was it? The horrible, was it Jonestown massacre where everybody drank the Kool-Aid and died? They thought it was one of those situations, or like it had happened recently, the Hale-Bopp Comet folks in Southern California who ate the Jell-O in that case, I think, and put bags over their head and went to meet the comet. So in the Waco, Texas thing, the FBI guys got it into their heads that this was a bad cult situation and that these people were not free to leave the compound if they wanted to. And it turns out, they were perfectly free. In fact, they were out in the town all the time working. They had friends. It was not any of this. But because there was a religious element connected to all of this, the FBI guys profiled this group in such a way that made it impossible for them to communicate with each other. And the thing that is really fascinating about the article is watching the transcripts of the negotiations, because they're both speaking English, but they are not speaking the same language at all. And it was that inability to communicate that led to the horrible conflagration at the end. And it was amazing, because I'm sitting there thinking, oh my gosh, it's exactly the same thing. It's that you can't even speak the same language. You're just going to keep insulting each other because you don't know what the other person's talking about. And the nice thing about today's chapters is we start to see that breaking down. We start to see Margaret finally having someone who's willing to kind of teach her a little bit, ask questions, but also teach her a little bit about what it's like to live in Milton. So that was cool. The Koresh article and the parallel. The other thing I wanted to announce, it doesn't matter quite so much yet, but it will very soon. If you are young, you have no muscle memory about the 70s or prior to that, and you might never have heard of a movie called Norma Ray. You may only know Sally Field as feisty Mrs. Lincoln from the Daniel Day-Lewis Lincoln movie. I don't even know what you know her from. I know her as the Flying Nun. My mom knows her as Gidget. And then she was in Smokey and the Bandit, which was awesome. And so, but it was all this kind of lightweight stuff. She was just this cute, perky little actress. And then she does Norma Ray. And if you have never seen this movie before, you simply must. I don't know that it's okay to show children. I think there's one place where it would really not be a good idea to. But there are scenes that you would probably want to share with your child because they are such inspirational moments. And and you'll walk away saying, kvetch, kvetch, kvetch. And it will all make sense if you see the movie. And I bring this up for two reasons. One is that understanding unions and understanding the reasons behind unions, not our current state of unions, whatever complicated thing that is, but understanding where it came from and what the impetus was in the beginning is crucial. And Norma Ray is being remastered and re-released in a cleaned up version. So it's now on Blu-ray, and Sally Field won an Oscar for that. And it was a big deal for her. Anybody who remembers that Academy Awards, you remember, you like me, you really like me. But it was also one of those films that I think really captured the difficulties that even in a modern setting, the difficulties that people faced when trying to find a way to improve their lives. And so that was done in 1979. And they're actually, it's like Week of Unions. There were three other movies that are coming out that have been remastered on Blu-ray. Blue Collar, which was 1978. Silkwood, which is Meryl Streep and Cher. Go Cher. If you've never thought Cher could act, you should go see Silkwood. That was 1983. And then Matewan, which is actually about the 20s in the United States, the 1920s in the United States. And it's a John Sayles film. If you've never seen John Sayles films, he's a very interesting director, and it's a very interesting movie. And the cast will surprise you, both by their being so young and also by who they are, because now you know most of them, and that nobody did back at the time. And that brings us to Margaret and today's chapters, chapter 13 and 14. And if you recall, last week, Margaret had to sit through Mrs. Thornton and her daughter's visit, and that was not particularly pleasant. But she had been wanting to go visit Bessie, who she had told she would. So this chapter 13, picks up with Margaret heading over to Bessie's place. Now, we've talked before briefly about the fact that when Margaret was the son of a clergyman, this would have been a perfectly normal thing for her to do. But it turns out that actually in Victorian England, this had become kind of controversial. This is a lot of really interesting research. For those of you listening to Bleak House, if you think back to Mrs. Jellyby, but also and especially to Mrs. Particle, who goes visiting the poor and makes things much worse than she should have, or than leaving them alone would have. That's where there was this problem. It was like competitive poor visiting. It was kind of like a mobility issue that once you hit a certain level of middle class or upper middle classness, women who had nothing else to do would kind of compete to see who could help the most poor, which then made some people behave more poor than they actually were to just, get a handout. So it caused all sorts of craziness. And this is why Margaret is really interesting. She may not be able to deal with the merchant class at all, but she knows how to pay a visit to somebody who isn't as well off as she is. So when she goes to Bessie's, she notices that the floor has been cleaned. They called it rough stoning, where I am guessing, because there aren't any references that I've been able to find to this, that rough stoning would just be sweeping off the stones. And she notices that it's really only the visible ones that got cleaned. Under the chairs and under the table didn't get cleaned. But the other thing that I thought was kind of cool, Margaret is paying attention, but she misinterprets some things. Like, there's a fire in the grate. It's a warm day. She thinks that they must have the fire there because Bessie is sick. But in fact, they have the fire there because coal is expensive. And putting a fire up shows that you respect the person who's there. I had something kind of similar happen when I was in the Dominican Republic. My sister and I were visiting some musicians out in the barrio where it was a long walk to the nearest store. And they offered us rum and Coke or rum and Pepsi and chipped ice. And the ice, it was really interesting. The ice came in a long, thin plastic bag. So it was like a long tube of ice. It was really cool. It made for really easy storage. And on the way out, I said to my sister, that was special, wasn't it? Having the ice, because they didn't have a refrigerator. And she looked at me and she said, yeah, that was because we were there. They wouldn't have had it otherwise. And it was hot. And that was important. And I sure appreciated it. And God, the musicians were great. So Margaret misses that one, but she gets a lot of the other stuff that's really important. And along with other really important stuff, we are going to find out a lot more about Margaret and Bessie and Margaret's brother in today's chapters. There's a lot of talking in the chapters, and a lot gets exposed. So without waiting any longer, let's listen to chapters 13 and 14 of Elizabeth Gaskell's North and South.
Chapter 13. A soft breeze in a sultry place. That doubt and trouble, fear and pain and anguish, all are shadows vain, that death itself shall not remain. That weary deserts we may tread, a dreary labyrinth may thread, through dark ways underground be led. Yet, if we will one guide obey, the dreariest path, the darkest way, shall issue out in heavenly day. And we, on diverse shores now cast, shall meet, our perilous voyage past, all in our Father's house at last. R.C. Trench. Margaret flew upstairs as soon as their visitors were gone, and put on her bonnet and shawl, to run and inquire how Bessie Higgins was, and sit with her as long as she could before dinner. As she went along the crowded, narrow streets, she felt how much of interest they had gained by the simple fact of her having learnt to care for a dweller in them. Mary Higgins, the slatternly younger sister, had endeavoured as well as she could to tidy up the house for the expected visit. There had been rough stoning done in the middle of the floor, while the flags under the chairs and table and round the walls retained their dark, unwashed appearance. Although the day was hot, there burnt a large fire in the grate, making the whole place feel like an oven. Margaret did not understand that the lavishness of coals was a sign of hospitable welcome to her on Mary's part, and thought that perhaps the oppressive heat was necessary for Bessie. Bessie herself lay on a squab, or short sofa, placed under the window. She was very much more feeble than on the previous day, and tired with raising herself at every step to look out and see if it was Margaret coming. And now that Margaret was there, and had taken a chair by her, Bessie lay back silent and content to look at Margaret's face and touch her articles of dress with a childish admiration of their fineness of texture. "I never knew why folk in the Bible cared for soft raiment afore, but it must be nice to go dressed as you do. It's different from common. Most fine folk tire my eyes out with their colours, but somehow yours rest me. Where did you get this frock?" "In London," said Margaret, much amused. "London? Have you been in London?" "Yes, I lived there for some years, but my home was in a forest, in the country." "Tell me about it," said Bessie. "I like to hear speak of the country and trees and such like things."
She leant back and shut her eye and crossed her hands over her breast, lying at perfect rest, as if to receive all the ideas Margaret could suggest. Margaret had never spoken of Helston since she left it, except just naming the place incidentally. She saw it in dreams more vivid than life, and as she fell away to slumber at nights, her memory wandered in all its pleasant places. But her heart was open to this girl. "Oh, Bessie, I love the home we have left so dearly. I wish you could see it. I cannot tell you half its beauty. There are great trees standing all about it, with their branches stretching long and level and making a deep shade of rest even at noonday. And yet, though every leaf may seem still, there is a continual rushing sound of movement all around, not close at hand. Then, sometimes, the turf is as soft and fine as velvet, and sometimes quite lush with the perpetual moisture of a little hidden tinkling brook near at hand. And then, in other parts, there are billowy ferns, whole stretches of fern, some in the green shadow, some with long streaks of golden sunlight lying on them, just like the sea. "I have never seen the sea," murmured Bessie. "But go on." "Then, here and there are wide commons, high up as if above the very tops of the trees." "I'm glad of that. I felt smothered like down below. When I have gone for an out, I've always wanted to get high up and see far away and take a deep breath of fullness in that air. I get smothered enough in Milton, and I think the sound you speak of among the trees going on forever and ever would send me dazed. It's that made my head ache so in the mill. Now, on these commons, I reckon, there is but little noise?" "No," said Margaret, "nothing but here and there a lark high in the air. Sometimes I used to hear a farmer speaking sharp and loud to his servants, but it was so far away that it only reminded me pleasantly that other people were hard at work in some distant place, while I just sat on the heather and did nothing. I used to think once that if I could have a day of doing nothing to rest me, a day in some quiet place like that you speak on, it would maybe set me up. But now I've had many days of idleness, and I'm just as weary of them as I was of my work. Sometimes I'm so tired out, I think I cannot enjoy heaven without a piece of rest first. I'm rather afeard of going straight there, without getting a good sleep in the grave to set me up." "Don't be afraid, Bessie," said Margaret, laying her hand on the girl's. "God can give you more perfect rest than even idleness on earth or the dead sleep of the grave can do." Bessie moved uneasily. Then she said, "I wish Father would not speak as he does. He means well, as I told you yesterday, and tell you again and again. But, you see, though I don't believe him a bit by day, yet by night, when I'm in a fever, half asleep and half awake, it comes back upon me. Oh, so bad. And I think, if this should be the end of all, and if all I've been born for is just to work my heart and my life away, and to sicken in this dree place with them mill noises in my ears forever, till I could scream out for them to stop and let me have a little piece of quiet, and with the fluff filling my lungs till I thirst to death for one long, deep breath of the clear air you speak on, and my mother gone, and I never able to tell her again how I loved her, and all of my troubles. I think, if this is the end, and that there's no God to wipe away all tears from all eyes, yo, wench, yo," said she, sitting up and clutching violently, almost fiercely at Margaret's hand, "I could go mad and kill you, I could." She fell back completely worn out with her passion. Margaret knelt down by her. "Bessie, we have a Father in heaven. I know it, moaned she, turning her head uneasily from side to side. I'm very wicked. I've spoken very wickedly. Oh, don't be frightened by me and never come again. I would not harm a hair of your head. And, opening her eyes and looking earnestly at Margaret, I believe, perhaps, more than you do of what's to come. I read the book of Revelations until I know it off by heart, and I never doubt when I'm waking and in my senses of all the glory I'm to come to. Don't let us talk of what fancies come into your head when you are feverish. I would rather hear something about what you used to do when you were well. I think I was well when Mother died, but I have never been rightly strong since somewhere about that time. I began to work in a garden room soon after, and the fluff got into my lungs and poisoned me. Fluff? Said Margaret inquiringly. Fluff, repeated Bessie. Little bits as fly off from the cotton when they're carding it and fill the air till it looks all fine white dust. They say it winds round the lungs and tightens 'em up. Anyhow, there's many a one as works in a carding room that falls into a waste, coughing and spitting blood, because they're just poisoned by the fluff. But can't it be helped? Asked Margaret. I dunno. Some folk have a great wheel at one end of their carding rooms to make a draught and carry off the dust, but that wheel costs a deal of money, £500 or £600, maybe, and brings in no profit, so it's but a few of the masters as will put 'em up, and I've heard tell of men who didn't like working places where there was a wheel, 'cause they said as how it made 'em hungry, that after they'd been long used to swallowing fluff to go without it, and that their wage ought to be raised if they were to work in such places. So, between masters and men, the wheels fall through. I know I wish there'd been a wheel in our place, though. Did not your father know about it? Asked Margaret. Yes, and he were sorry, but our factory were a good one on the whole, and a steady, likely set of people, and father was afeard of letting me go to a strange place, for, though you would not think it now, many a one then used to call me a gradely lass enough, and I did not like to be reckoned nesh and soft, and Mary's schooling were to be kept up, mother said, and father, he were always liking to buy books and go to lectures of one kind or another, all of which took money, so I just worked on till I shall never get the whir out of my ears or the fluff out of my throat in this world. That's all. How old are you? Asked Margaret. 19 come July. And I too am 19, she thought more sorrowfully than Bessie did of the contrast between them. She could not speak for a moment or two for the emotion she was trying to keep down. About Mary, said Bessie. I wanted to ask you to be a friend to her. She's 17, but she's the last on us, and I don't want her to go to the mill, and yet I don't know what she's fit for. She could not do, Margaret glanced unconsciously at the uncleaned corners of the room. She could hardly undertake a servant's place, could she? We have an old faithful servant, almost a friend, who wants help, but who is very particular, and it would not be right to plague her with giving her any assistance that would really be an annoyance and an irritation. No, I see. I reckon you're right. Mary's a good wench, but who has she had to teach her what to do about the house? No mother, and me at the mill till I were good for nothing, but scolding her for doing badly what I didn't know how to do a bit. But I wish she could have lived with you for all that. But even though she may not be exactly fitted to come and live with us as a servant, and I don't know about that, I will always try and be a friend to her for your sake, Bessie. And now I must go. I will come again as soon as I can, but if it should not be tomorrow or the next day, or even a week or a fortnight hence, don't think I've forgotten you. I may be busy. I'll know you won't forget me again. I'll not mistrust you no more. But remember, in a week or a fortnight, I may be dead and buried. I'll come as soon as I can, Bessie, said Margaret, squeezing her hand tight. But you'll let me know if you are worse. Aye, that will I, said Bessie, returning the pressure. From that day forwards, Mrs. Hale became more and more of a suffering invalid. It was now drawing near to the anniversary of Edith's marriage, and looking back upon the year's accumulated heap of troubles, Margaret wondered how they had been borne. If she could have anticipated them, how she would have shrunk away and hid herself from the coming time. And yet, day by day had, of itself and by itself, been very endurable. Small, keen, bright little spots of positive enjoyment having come sparkling into the very middle of sorrows. A year ago, or when she first went to Helston and first became silently conscious of the querulousness in her mother's temper, she would have groaned bitterly over the idea of a long illness to be borne in a strange, desolate, noisy, busy place with diminished comforts on every side of the home life. But with the increase of serious and just ground of complaint, a new kind of patience had sprung up in her mother's mind. She was gentle and quiet in intense bodily suffering, almost in proportion as she had been restless and depressed when there had been no real cause for grief. Mr. Hale was in exactly that stage of apprehension which, in men of his stamp, takes the shape of wilful blindness. He was more irritated than Margaret had ever known him at his daughter's expressed anxiety.
Indeed, Margaret, you are growing fanciful. God knows I should be the first to take the alarm if your mother were really ill. We always saw when she had her headaches at Helston, even without her telling us. She looks quite pale and white even when she is ill, and now she has a bright, healthy colour in her cheeks, just as she used to have when I first knew her.
But, Papa, said Margaret with hesitation, do you know, I think that is the flush of pain.
Nonsense, Margaret. I tell you, you are too fanciful. You are the person not well, I think. Send for the doctor tomorrow for yourself, and then, if it will make your mind easier, he can see your mother.
Thank you, dear Papa. It will make me happier indeed. And she went up to him to kiss him, but he pushed her away, gently enough, but still as if she had suggested unpleasant ideas which he should be glad to get rid of as readily as he could of her presence. He walked uneasily up and down the room.
Poor Maria,
said he, half soliloquizing.
I wish one could do right without sacrificing others. I shall hate this town and myself too if she— Pray, Margaret, does your mother often talk to you of the old places, of Helston, I mean?
No, Papa, said Margaret sadly.
And you see, she can't be fretting after them, eh? It has always been a comfort to me to think that your mother was so simple and open that I knew every little grievance she had. She never would conceal anything seriously affecting her health from me, would she, eh, Margaret? I'm quite sure she would not. So don't let me hear of these foolish, morbid ideas. Come, give me a kiss and run off to bed.
But she heard him pacing about, raccooning as she and Edith used to call it, long after her slow and languid undressing was finished, long after she began to listen as she lay in bed. Chapter 14. The Mutiny. I was used to sleep at nights as sweetly as a child. Now, if the wind blew rough, it made me start and think of my poor boy tossing about upon the roaring seas. And then I seemed to feel that it was hard to take him from me for such a little fault. Southey, It was a comfort to Margaret about this time to find that her mother drew more tenderly and intimately towards her than she had ever done since the days of her childhood. She took her to her heart as a confidential friend, the post Margaret had always longed to fill and had envied Dixon for being preferred to. Margaret took pains to respond to every call made upon her for sympathy, and they were many, even when they bore relation to trifles which she would no more have noticed or regarded herself than the elephant would perceive the little pin at his feet, which yet he lifts carefully up at the bidding of his keeper. All unconsciously, Margaret drew near to a reward. One evening, Mr. Hale being absent, her mother began to talk to her about her brother Frederick, the very subject on which Margaret had longed to ask questions, and almost the only one on which her timidity overcame her natural openness. The more she wanted to hear about him, the less likely she was to speak.
"Oh, Margaret, it was so windy last night. It came howling down the chimney in our room. I could not sleep. I never can when there is such a terrible wind. I got into a wakeful habit when poor Frederick was at sea, and now, even if I don't waken all at once, I dream of him in some stormy sea with great clear glass-green walls of waves on either side his ship, but far higher than her very masts, curling over her with that cruel, terrible white foam, like some gigantic crested serpent. It is an old dream, but it always comes back on windy nights till I am thankful to waken, sitting straight and stiff up in bed with my terror. Poor Frederick! He is on land now, so wind can do him no harm, though I did think it might shake down some of those tall chimneys.
Where is Frederick now, Mamma? Our letters are directed to the care of Master's barber at Cadiz, I know, but where is he himself?
I can't remember the name of the place, but he is not called Hale. You must remember that, Margaret. Notice the F.D. in every corner of the letters. He has taken the name of Dickinson. I wanted him to have been called Beresford, to which he had a kind of right, but your father thought he had better not. He might be recognized, you know, if he were called by my name.
Mamma, said Margaret, I was at Aunt Shaw's when it all happened, and I suppose I was not old enough to be told plainly about it. But I should like to know now, if I may, if it does not give you too much pain to speak about it.
Pain? No,
replied Mrs. Hale, her cheek flushing.
Yet it is pain to think that perhaps I may never see my darling boy again. Or else he did right, Margaret. They may say what they like, but I have his own letters to show, and I'll believe him, though he is my son, sooner than any court-martial on earth. Go to my little Japan cabinet, dear, and in the second left-hand drawer you will find a packet of letters.
Margaret went. There were the yellow sea-stained letters, with the peculiar fragrance which ocean letters have. Margaret carried them back to her mother, who untied the silken string with trembling fingers, and, examining their dates, she gave them to Margaret to read, making her hurried, anxious remarks on their contents almost before her daughter could have understood what they were.
You see, Margaret, how far from the very first he disliked Captain Reed. He was second lieutenant in the ship, the Orion, in which Frederick sailed the very first time. Poor little fellow, how well he looked in his midshipman's dress, with his dirk in his hand, cutting open all the newspapers with it as if it were a paper-knife. But this Mr. Reed, as he was then, seemed to take a dislike to Frederick from the very beginning. And then, stay, these are the letters he wrote on board the Russell. When he was appointed to her and found his old enemy Captain Reed in command, he did mean to bear all his tyranny patiently. Look, this is the letter. Just read it, Margaret. Where is it, he says? Stop. My father may rely upon me that I will bear with all proper patience everything that one officer and gentleman can take from another. But from my former knowledge of my present captain, I confess I look forward with apprehension to a long course of tyranny on board the Russell. You see, he promises to bear patiently, and I am sure he did, for he was the sweetest-tempered boy, when he was not vexed, that could possibly be. Is that the letter in which he speaks of Captain Reed's impatience with the men for not going through the ship's manoeuvres as quickly as the Avenger? You see, he says that they had many new hands on board the Russell, while the Avenger had been nearly 3 years on the station, with nothing to do but keep slavers off and work her men till they ran up and down the rigging like rats or monkeys. Margaret slowly read the letter, half illegible through the fading of the ink. It might be, it probably was, a statement of Captain Reed's imperiousness in trifles, very much exaggerated by the narrator, who had written it while fresh and warm from the scene of altercation. Some sailors being aloft in the main topsail rigging, the captain had ordered them to race down, threatening the hindmost with the cat of nine tails. He who was the farthest on the spar, feeling the impossibility of passing his companions, and yet passionately dreading the disgrace of the flogging, threw himself desperately down to catch a rope considerably lower, failed, and fell senseless on deck. He only survived for a few hours afterwards, and the indignation of the ship's crew was at boiling point when young Hale wrote, "But we did not receive this letter till long, long after we heard of the mutiny. Poor Fred! I dare say it was a comfort to him to write it, even though he could not have known how to send it, poor fellow. And then we saw a report in the papers, that's to say, long before Fred's letter reached us, of an atrocious mutiny having broken out on board the Russell, and that the mutineers had remained in possession of the ship, which had gone off, it was supposed, to be a pirate, and that Captain Reed was sent adrift in a boat with some men, officers or something, whose names were all given, for they were picked up by a West Indian steamer. Oh, Margaret, how your father and I turned sick over that list when there was no name of Frederick Hale. We thought it must be some mistake, for poor Fred was such a fine fellow, only perhaps rather too passionate, and we hoped that the name of Carr, which was in the list, was a misprint for that of Hale. Newspapers are so careless. And towards post-time the next day, Papa set off to walk to Southampton to get the papers, and I could not stop at home, so I went to meet him. He was very late, much later than I thought he would have been, and I sat down under the hedge to wait for him. He came at last, his arms hanging loose down, his head sunk and walking heavily along, as if every step was a labor and a trouble. Margaret, I see him now. Don't go on, Mamma, I can understand it all, said Margaret, leaning up caressingly against her mother's side and kissing her hand. No, you can't, Margaret. No one can who did not see him then. I could hardly lift myself up to go and meet him. Everything seemed so to reel around me all at once. And when I got to him, he did not speak or seem surprised to see me there more than 3 miles from home, beside the old beech tree. But he put my arm in his and kept stroking my hand, as if he wanted to soothe me to be very quiet under some great heavy blow. And when I trembled so all over that I could not speak, he took me in his arms and stooped down his head on mine, and began to shake and to cry in a strange, muffled, groaning voice, till I, for very fright, stood quite still, and only begged him to tell me what he had heard. And then, with his hand jerking, as if someone else moved it against his will, he gave me a wicked newspaper to read, calling our Frederick a traitor of the blackest dye, a base, ungrateful disgrace to his profession. Oh, I cannot tell you what bad words they did not use. I took the paper in my hands as soon as I had read it. I tore it up to little bits. I tore it. Oh, I believe, Margaret, I tore it with my teeth. I did not cry. I could not. My cheeks were hot as fire, and my very eyes burnt in my head. I saw your father looking grave at me. I said it was a lie, and so it was. Months after, this letter came, and you see what provocation Frederick had. It was not for himself or his own injuries he rebelled, but he would speak his mind to Captain Reed, and so it went on from bad to worse. And you see, most of the sailors stuck by Frederick. I think, Margaret, she continued after a pause, in a weak, trembling, exhausted voice, I am glad of it. I am prouder of Frederick standing up against injustice than if he had been simply a good officer. I am sure I am, said Margaret in a firm, decided tone. Loyalty and obedience to wisdom and justice are fine, but it is still finer to defy arbitrary power unjustly and cruelly used, not on behalf of ourselves, but on behalf of others more helpless. For all that, I wish I could see Frederick once more, just once. He was my first baby, Margaret. Mrs. Hale spoke wistfully, and almost as if apologizing for the yearning, craving wish, as though it were a depreciation of her remaining child. But such an idea never crossed Margaret's mind. She was thinking how her mother's desire could be fulfilled. It is 6 or 7 years ago. Would they still prosecute him, Mother? If he came and stood his trial, what would be the punishment? Surely he might bring evidence of his great provocation. It would do no good, replied Mrs. Hale. Some of the sailors who accompanied Frederick were taken, and there was a court-martial held on them on board the Amicia. I believed all they said in their defense, poor fellows, because it just agreed with Frederick's story. But it was of no use. And for the first time during the conversation, Mrs. Hale began to cry. Yet something possessed Margaret to force the information she foresaw, yet dreaded, from her mother. What happened to them, Mamma? Asked she. They were hung at the yard arm, said Mrs. Hale solemnly. And the worst was that the court, in condemning them to death, said they had suffered themselves to be led astray from their duty by their superior officers. They were silent for a long time. And Frederick was in South America for several years, was he not? Yes, and now he is in Spain, at Cadiz or somewhere near it. If he comes to England, he will be hung. I shall never see his face again, for if he comes to England, he will be hung. There was no comfort to be given. Mrs. Hale turned her face to the wall and lay perfectly still in her mother's despair. Nothing could be said to console her. She took her hand out of Margaret's with a little impatient movement, as if she would fain be left alone with the recollection of her son. When Mr. Hale came in, Margaret went out, oppressed with gloom and seeing no promise of brightness on any side of the horizon.
Wow. So that's what happened to her brother. I had lots of things that I thought it might have been, but that was not it. And it's interesting because this concept of mutinying or characters having been in or around mutinies has come up before in different books. But this is the first time, I think the Mutiny on the Bounty was early 1800s. But this was the first time I remember reading a character who's been accused of being involved in a mutiny who wasn't like, what's his name, Wickham in Pride and Prejudice. You know, that Frederick isn't smarmy, at least as far as we know. And his mother and father both believed him, which I suppose may not hold water with anyone, but it seems to me that the Hales are the kind of people who would actually stop and weigh the evidence and take a look. And they had all of this kind of background information on this particular captain. And so poor Frederick, there is nothing he can do. Nothing he can do. There's no way to appeal this process, and there's certainly no way to safely come back and fight for your rights to a fair trial. So that stinks. And I also thought it was kind of interesting at the end of chapter 13 when Gaskell says that Hale's response to his wife getting sicker is his la la la, I'm not going to notice. And that's just the way guys are. I thought, who's she talking about? But that didn't surprise me a whole lot. But what did surprise me was I kind of had Mrs. Thornton's attitude towards Mrs. Hale. From the beginning of the book, I thought, like I had mentioned earlier, that, oh, she's going to be Mrs. Bennet. She's going to be that kind of silly woman. And then it became clear that she kind of wasn't. She doesn't strike you as being that silly. And now she really is actually sick and getting worse. And that makes her a different kind of person. She really might have been really suffering all that time. And it's nice, at least, that as she is getting more ill, she is drawing closer to Margaret. It's hard on Margaret, I'm sure, but nice that at least they have the time together as she's declining. And one thing that struck me as very interestingly done and subtle, I didn't catch it until Margaret goes to visit Bessie. And Bessie almost immediately asks Margaret to describe Helston. And Margaret does. And she does a lovely job. And her stories really do seem to make Bessie happy instead of jealous or weary or angry. It's just for her, it's something nice to picture. But the last time we heard somebody ask Margaret to describe Helston was Lennox, and she gave him what for and pushed him off and said she couldn't possibly describe it. How interesting the difference in how she is asked and in where she is in relationship to the place. Yeah, I don't know if it's Bessie that made her soften, or I mean, I don't think she would ever responding to Bessie the way she did to Lennox. But is it the distance? Is it the time distance, the physical distance, the person? I don't know. Maybe it's just all of it. But I thought, oh, that was nicely done. That was nicely done, because now we really can start to see in one very specific way how Margaret has changed since she's moved to Milton. And that is where I will leave you for this week. I hope you have a fantastic week. I hope I make it through this week, and I will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye. You can find show notes for this episode and links to other episodes at CraftLit.com. CraftLit also appears anywhere you can get a podcast: iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and on, including its own dedicated app. There are lots of ways to support CraftLit, from patreon.com/CraftLit to CraftLit.com memberships and channel memberships on YouTube. You can find out more details at CraftLit.com/premium. And as always, thank you for your support. And remember, if your hands are too busy to pick up a book, at least you can turn one on.